my step was, Sue.
And the year before.
Last year.
Isn't that or simple? Yeah.
Okay. Where is Miles?
She flanked.
Everybody good? Cool. International human rights law to drug policy demonizes drug users and against them in their communities. Barred all 2005 with the moral often excluded these policies. The termination of results of right violations. Maybe so. Encouraging denial health services, eradicated illicit cross including annex on culture, damage to health care, the conflict drug prohibition has been human rights and despite the promise of human rights and people who communities. The ass dynamic interpretation of the single convention resolves arbitrary denying the right to health, domestic international reference and control crime, air abuse because of any indicators, attention hectares, child crimes, sexual health as a result of human rights against drug control and method Hispanic origin of the general friend health availance effective HIV prevention. These violations are to meet obligations described within the situation they seeking to fulfill are possibly interpreted with the IHR and negotiating regime public evidence of human rights violation linked to drug control. That means interpreted approach allows for progressive legal development to clear case can be made dynamic interpretation most important appropriate in the rights clear direction result of conflict interpretation must be interpreted human rights consideration minimum constitutional system be with the best advance in core human rights principle need to bridge the conflict intention between the drug control and human rights clear to imperative international control system international human rights species behave as they exist in parallel universal section approach to critical human rights violation drug control effort to be acknowledged and addressed and ended. And Latin American countries are calling for a transition away from the war on drugs. U.S. legalization allows them reform to progress and towards harm reduction. He doesn't limit eradication interdiction to lost credibility from time to time individual countries. The cheap time declines of illegal drugs, invariably offset increase in other countries. They believe the fact that the harm down extent to harm now extent to Latin American governments have become more critical. U.S. anti-drug policy increasingly Washington anti-drug policy seem not only effectual compatible comes to the governments increasingly resent Washington and flexible hard charting drug and the efforts to impose that on the rest of the hemisphere to Latin America. Know that given size of U.S. Washington dominant roles and no issue to right global strategy. See that U.S. literature with how to change U.S. policy. Over most countries the policy alternative harm reduction strategy. The best available, not the best available. The government should call for policy aimed at reducing harm and associated illicit drugs. The government should consider legalizing marijuana. The plan is necessary except to end the global prohibition regime. Marijuana spills over while 2013. The prohibition of the U.S. may be leading cause of global epidemic. The target encouraging governments to the illegal regulation marijuana in the U.S. Then far further the reformation of the take accountability reform for operation regulation of the official economy of the U.S. to do one of their murder and restructure marijuana laws that the U.S. works during misleading to repress experimentation to current emergency place the U.S. and aid to come for the prohibition ideals and replacement of the policy grounded health and disparity to legal regulations that would internationally and help prepare for relation to the international community and reach success about drug control marijuana to be likely to be a marijuana a simple mechanism and experimentation. The U.S. needs will considerable influence of those trials that calls for the appropriate policy resulting in a majority following conversely of U.S. leads called more tolerant policy drug and health majority will also welcome your information to a success to bureaucracy more than you the moderate peaceful person to be active as a catalyst into a real form of the application responsibility. The marijuana is a dominant effect to transform the prohibition regime. The punitive approach in Latin America destroys livelihoods, forces displacement, and continues violence. Marijuana legalization and key establishments for 14 the Colombian success to come to high price and herbicides spraying the destroying coconut also live within the impact of food security. The result was displaying to the 219,000 person forcibly displayed that more than 60,000 people died in security in Colombia and Mexico will start more than found in improving the effect of the dark impact of the huge Atlantic and human rights focus on military needed efforts to function and establish functioning judicial system. The law despite the evidence that U.S. continues to produce secure drugs in West Africa now. That's from after the West African Commission the call for decriminalization bringing the West Africa to the line with the OAS which prefers alternative legal and regulatory regimes to drugs starting with cannabis debates and to be important now as a term to policymakers listen and act. Using a human rights framework for marijuana legalization helps overcome current punitive policy used in international drug control hubs in 2014 consists finally facing a major Latin America to bring about change the actors to redefine the way drugs are understood rights and legal language health and human rights. Those challenging those active use that language argue the prohibition on human rights connecting conservative humanity found the convention of device one can referring rights after the power of rhetorical tool and having potential counter for blaming of any rhetorical ballot through detaching drugs into the economist framing of to engage in considerable politics over time dominated world. Human rights are plural and open to using them to indict state practice of new social world intervening rights or policy united which unites the democratic orientation of the rights and encourage democratic policy to remain open to the world and new and adding more managerial international rights or more sexual order than rights. Right, if you polarizing each other, the alter political practical level to there are claims that have been made on behalf of a variety of political actors against variety of authorities, contrary to the use of their rights and do not justify the open conservative adventure, the extension of liberals and capitalists, not identical to such the idea as such, rather to form the human rights politics is to be opposed. The plan's legal strategy is a structural critique of the treaties which enforce the war on drugs. The perspective is vital to politicize and come to grips with the single convention's colonial legacy. Moistened to one of the international code on the humans when they made a change to law related to cannabis use war on drugs failed to the international regime to the control of drugs as racist precedent that reflects the geopolitical north establishment 20th century the strict control of substance reform and central condition is how the Northwestern products and how tobacco and alcohol reform the convention for the country at the time of the excess force on the people it is important that therefore to interrogate drug convention practices and purchase for the farm the domestic implementation the purpose of the international human rights health protections important for human rights combined implementation domestic level who will change the lead the charge to reform the plan rules the international human rights law supersedes the single convention that's key to transition drug policy away from prohibitionism. Yodler 2013 the change marijuana policy universal country to indicate the time to come to the international drug convention the human rights must be applied to global drug policy rights and the declaration including health due process fair effort if you go from cruel treatment supersede the drug control prevention just to reflect the marijuana policy allowing the legalization of people to decide. The U.S. legalizing marijuana through a human rights framework is vital to end the war on drugs. Younger 2013, the war on drugs had devastated gathers in the region, including farmers pushing the party non-violent defenders to spend years and years in jail. The U.S. tax drug policy resulted in social unrest and violence, human rights violations, Latin American countries, increasing call for the question of the cost of Obama's drug policy remains at all times right for the U.S. human rights. From the first when it comes to drug policy, the home and abroad, the goals guarantee the payments to human rights and all over the system. War on drugs and urbanization, the drug policy can be resigned to the more human and effective places to recognize the rights of drug users. Drug use should be treated as public health and not a criminal issue. It is also important that we should type drug price just like the standard of cannabis state today is certainly important regarding increase number one being incarcerated for drug-related crimes, law enforcement, research, updates, seeking cannabis use or creating legal regulated cannabis markets help solve the problem. IHRL harm reduction works in the context of drug policy. It's most realistic and practical, sensitive to distinctive needs. Hunt 2008 it's time to develop human rights based approach to drug policy. Drug policy not simply allowed issues, also human rights issues, not human rights or unrealistic and practical misrepresentation rights and health initiative have evidence is really important. There is a overwhelming harm reduction initiative for the public health reduce avoidable suffering is not realistic. I don't know what is the health system must be responsive to people needs health systems include basic services. The best must include harm reduction. The working for human rights the goal should be to strong accessible integrated health system sensitive to distinctive needs all including people who use drugs. The human rights are not right magical solution, but because there are no magical solutions, the human rights have a constructive contribution to make, and harm reduction is a necessary component for resistance in the war on drugs. Political experimentation is vital. O'Malley does an AWOL risk, like all government, is a dangerous critical theory. Is too much and risk negative side. Such a way of examining risk and make assumptions that are problematic. They assume risk uniformity as if government to be matched by something rather than heterogeneous, a different risk effect. They assume the risk that arcane science provide an expert and ability co-opted. We might analyze different assumptions. Risk always shift by specific political environments. Risk may take a right diversity form. There's no obvious reason why risk cannot be inclusive rather than exclusion. There's no reason why risk has to be defenders against victims. There's no reason risk cannot be consistent. There's a program of social justice. Nothing governmentality deflects from political engagement. Governmentality specifically positive theories and assumes that over to produce broad phenomena some unruly underlying determinants regimes of truth provide the license domination governmentality associated approach to increase or repairs engagement whatever currently rails can be inevitable whatever is currently placed and remains open to further innovation does not mean that anything is possible and unless specific on what is feasible. This includes drawing governmental rationality. My point in the liberal ideas markets have the potential to democratize the definition of what exists that is strategic knowledge build a diagnosis of the ways in which existing government formative truth and lengthy truth specific purposes of government. It also involves understanding the government techniques whereby these efforts to be achieved. What is a successful outcome today? The most analysis have been only diagnosed and to ensure the truth is continues a liberal ethic of self. The an alternative vision if there's no practical alternative but to govern what would it not follow that the focus on the ethic of self abandons others to whatever faith have dealt to them emerges in the agnostic politics of politics that never close open to revision to governmentality may be a tool for political development, not merely an analytical drug harm minimization, entails intervention that address domination and social exclusion. They provide feasible political sites relevant lines with focus on exclusion, drug harm minimization, or forms of resistance in opposition to the war on drugs that risk or social effect that they are. There's some assumption that all risks are generated by users and some are created by government policy. They include prohibition and responsive that demonize users and making contingent demands is a necessary part of engagement in the complexity of modern politics. Reject totalizing accounts and label all attempts at political engagement violent or naive. As on not 2013, everything is made with specific practice, political short nonsense, substances of reasons they're making and specific relation to constructing political action operating on certain sovereign identity and reduce the picture by power instead of resisting the battle questioning power actually part of the attempt in the place to knowing agencies or to lose it in repeating to sort power also recognize and question the universal claims that are unsettled reported power unity manages characters product or agency within space of public sphere to attention with the intent to contact actions possible to see the agency research from the existing condition rather trivial projection totalizing sure they'll advocate them the pragmatism humility for politicians scholar agency or non-imagined request identity authenticity opposition to press from live and we're subject to free for oppression or multitude will bring about justice to ethical virtue called forward playing with the cards that are dealt to us devising tactic for tinkering what exists in specific context colors represent political powers to total information descriptive press subject to the complexity of politics to reduce homogeneity narratives and political engagement or reduce a total rejection options are limited rejection reform evolution or dispossession. It is instead found in the continued struggle to constitute within specific of the scripts governmental rationalities at the same time transform this overexpression oversimplification and nurture skepticism that identifying universally good or bad actors abstract solutions political problems of power and interacts in complex ways diverse faces. The governmentality heuristic focus on conformity complex diagnostic defense and their rights as situated exploration careful liberation rather overarching demonization power and organization of the rebel local these formulation focus on ethic continuously taking up spiritual practices such as astronomical way to spectrum revolution would instead of the intense process of reflexivity and the consequences of political choices. Thus, the plan: the United States should legalize marijuana in the United States by applying international human rights law to supersede the single convention on narcotic drugs. The law is obviously sorry. Yeah, human rights are an ideal that are affirmative attempts to actualize through specific mobilization. 2008 critical accounts for land and compartmentalization of the ideal. The similar argument prohibition that argument he used to extend our global power word to demand to limit global scales to put out parties to limited only emission to highlight them to hope that power to any country meets the first ethically the cop out. Barted cop out.
Alrighty. Are you ready?
Yep.
Why did you read this F against us?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, you saved it specifically for us, so I figured there was a reason.
They're obviously a good opponent.
Good opponent. Okay, it says 1AC Bosu. Why is the F sort of framed around us at the top?
We always put the opponent's name in the one seat.
Oh, that's nice.
It is
So,
Why would you lie to us like
the
that?
Hoover evidence says that we can use these to indict state practices.
You're really not
and
that special.
oh, well, that's me. Calls into question
Very
power
rude.
and prevent.
Hmm?
What do you think is necessary to indict state practice?
With contingent political demands, dealing with the
What's
cards that were dealt,
what's the utility of that experimentation?
solving problems in people's lives.
How does it solve problems?
Ours is taking nationalities and experimenting with them, see if you can reform them is useful that way.
Why?
Why?
Yeah,
Because
why is it
allows us-
useful?
It allows us to find agency within moments
What
instead of
agency?
totalizing.
How do we use that agency?
Honestly, like
A bunch of claims of formative indictment of state policy.
solvency cards about the plan that you're
It's
really
about
not
why
what
the
those cards
claim
say.
for accumulated power, why your scholarship is important because it's a scholarship.
What happens because our plan is a good idea.
Well, I understand. Deeper than that. Why is voting for the F because it's a good idea a good idea?
This is a debate.
Can
We
it's
think
be
that,
around
like,
the question
we
of
think
whether or not- Why is the ballot necessary? Why should the ballot be restricted?
Oh, that's what it's
Listen to the sort of orders of. Is that how you exercise? I don't think says it's right. Yeah.
Well, how would you like the debate to be decided?
Well, we'll tell you. For the Moisten evidence, I think a lot of the solvency for the sort of precedent spillover. Why would the precedent be reapplied?
A couple of the presidential doctrines set by illicitly superseding the single convention, which encompasses broader amounts of drugs.
I just like,
Constrained, but they would.
sure they would follow.
Our argument is that it would end in the.
What if they didn't?
Ballot card says we should
No,
put
like,
emphasis on what is feasible.
Well, that's not the
what-
only
what
solvency
is-
claim. There can show people.
But
that
if judges know each other, then why would this be able to experiment?
No, it's not about that. It's
What
about,
is
it's
the
about policy.
to other drugs, i.e. harm on
Isn't that the
heroin?
a little bit.
I guess we don't.
So we're gonna do the email thread. We just do it after.
Why don't we send a different
Because I didn't include them.
They
We actually
they don't like put people on the
detail on there?
It'd be on our kind of.
yours is totally fine. So we're not going to.
No, I just want to hijack a little private one, but details include. We include detail. Sure. Making sure. Too often in the case.
You go a little slow here fast.
Y'all got it?
Sorry, one second.
Perhaps the original one and see a gorgeous card read by Sextus Empiricus. Come on, first, which means there's no reason to vote out because there's no inherency. Second, there's no way to apprehend they do exist, and if we could, they would already exist, which creates an inherency paradox for the absence to existence, and it is already happening. Things exist, and we can apprehend them, we cannot communicate them, because we must translate them into substance incommensurate with the attributes that we translate. The inexistential advantage of the app, any acceptable rig game. Sextus Empiricus, 200 CE. Nothing. Either the existence or the existent existent is not the case. It would both exist and not exist at the same time. The non-existent therefore does not existence will not exist, and they are opposites of each other. But if the existent therefore if the existent exists, it will be some beginning. But the eternal did not have a beginning. If it is somewhere, then in which it is, that is something other than it, and therefore it will be without limit. There is nothing greater than the unlimited. The unlimited cannot exist anywhere. Accordingly, the existence is not contained in itself. So if the existence is eternal and unlimited, if it's unlimited, it is nowhere. If it's nowhere, it does not exist. Neither the existing can be generated for its coming into being. It has come from the existent or the non-existent, but it has not come from the non-existent. For it is existent, if it has not come to be, but already exists. Nor from the non-existent. I'm marking it non-existent. Okay. Harm reduction advocacy relies on an understanding of powers repressive as a responsibilizing discourse that centralizes a neoliberal subject and cements a society of control into public health misunderstanding and vivifying necropolitical discipline. McLean and 13 offenders of harm reduction might protest that such programs offer non-punitive approach to drug use constituting a third way between established criminal justice and treatment-oriented responses. Not coercive nature of harm reduction that implicates within the larger field of disciplinary power operating without recourse to violence and disciplinary power does not reject repress certain behaviors, but rather train and organize bodies. Harm reduction seeks to separate and differentiate a multiplicity of drug users. Harm reduction, the rise of new public health and growing dominance of neoliberal governance in general, unlike the modalities of drug control founded on prohibition, harm minimization delegates responsibility onto the individual user, recognizing the role of choice in the most efficient government of drug use. Harm reduction discourse as human and inscribe a neoliberal subject and therefore neglect the material constraints faced by most drug users. Specific harm reduction technologies serve to govern chaotic subjects, overdose prevention, supervise injection facilities and maintenance have all been explored as insidious mechanisms of social control. International law attempts to capture the antagonism real within these symbolically determined rules and regulations, making the masking the lacking, causing violence. In 14, the message from the Lacanian analysis is not to cure the patient's ego, but to lead a kicking and screaming and find out the bloody histories that constitute a subject. The subject has to dethrone the big other international law. It's marked by the lack of dissent of the Constitution of international law. It's achieved by a cut. The subject goes endlessly looking to recover the missing bit, deluding himself that if she had been just a bit more, she would have been holy. When we hear the international criminal laws aimed at complete human rights law, we must recall that international law will always be lacking something, will always be missing to look for the missing bit, preventing us from admitting to and doing something that our own deficiency public international law. Well, in at least two registers, one hand a technocratic tone of authority, and on the other a realm of passions and emotion. The third register is the real. We must address all three, not just two registers. The experiment is a monster within which cannot be represented, assimilated into our psychic space politics. We'll always dwell in the realm of fantasy, but the politics we fly away from into a supposedly safe haven of rules and regulation, our imaginary fantasy. We indulge in the fantasies in order to avoid the real, the retreating to laws, retreating to reality to avoid the real. Politics and law are just two sides of the three-pronged problematic. Neither law nor politics can eliminate the real. That which cannot be legislated away insists with more force than any rule of law and imaginary politics. That causes extinction. To circle too close to the thing which is ethically forbidden gives us anguish of the heaviest kind, so we generally don't death drive as most direct satisfaction of the drive-in, but it's also unconsciously masochistic. We refuse to acknowledge our time behind is willfully ignoring drive toward death for the entire species. The ecological disaster for proliferation, nuclear weapons, is vital resource for energy and democracy. Or anything we have the thing armed to the teeth with no sovereign good. We think the answer is more. It should be more moral. However, the idea of the good predicates itself on a radically false picture of the human condition. Just sting when it returns after being denied is even more devastating. We are accelerating along a race toward destruction, and nihilism has never threatened such a grand finale. We think that being more moral is the answer rather than the source of our problems. The death drive will go beyond the destruction of mere beings, destroying the principle of which fresh sense could emerge. We can say yes to life in a way that overcomes nihilism by freeing ourselves from the wasted neuroses. We must train ourselves to stare at the real directly in the face. Chances are we going to end up happy enough and not even a puff of genuine political praxis. We either face up to the death drive or let the drive research until it finishes us. Failure to think enjoyment in relation to politics causes phantasmic repression, which always causes the return and eruptions of death and this sort of bad modes of politics that they are talking about. McGowan and 13, we one thinking person would not want to side with life rather than death, interpreting terrorist attacks and ultimately life reform response to imperialism. They begin being in love with death. They can't explain why so many suicide bombers are middle class. We must imagine there's appeal in death itself. Death is the source of values. Without the value of death provides neither love nor ice cream nor friendship or anything we enjoy would be, especially when having an infinite amount of time we would be able to enjoy what it seems to make life worth living by depriving us of an authentic relationship to death. The ideology that proclaims life is the only value, creates a valueless world where nothing matters to us. Religion, life would seem to leave the value-creating power of death intact, but that is not what happens. We change the way that we experience the world. The capitalist economy suffocates from too much life. The further the project of modernity moves in the direction of life, the more forcefully the spectrum of fundamentalism will make its presence felt. Exclusive focus on life produces eruptions of death. Explosions of fundamentalism violence represent the return of modernity. Structure cannot accommodate violence is a blowback, not simply to response to imperial aggression. Debate is structured by an agential fantasy. The plan is an impotent political demand on the state that is answered and alleviated by the judges only to restart the cycle next round. The AFT and the WTO protesters share a common refusal to surpass politics as demand for the politics of direct claim. The alternative is not a new mode of politics, but a no to the affirmative. Only this intervention breaks apart fantasy and opens up the AFT to a mode of political subjectivity that can name and claim what it wants without calling on an inaccessible symbolic other. Lundberg in 12. Lacan provides a way of thinking the political space of demand for politics and practices of working through specific demands. Demand represent the hegemonic order, creating an implicit picture of how it functions and how it might change. Framing enjoyment is equivalent, which Gemini Leclau identifies the fundamental split in psychoanalytic theory between the universal and particular demand, between the one who enters an equivalential relationship by identitarian claim that suitors are subject to a set of linkages. The demand to be recognized as subject is given the of the symbolic order. The perverse dialectic of misfiring surplus and identity reveals something politically dangerous on and moving beyond the demand. Not all equivalences are equally equivalent. The generative power of the demand relies on the fact that some demands will be refused. Egoes nothing more than a repetition of refusal of demands. The signifiers are constituted by their difference and subject coming into being negotiating the entry into the realm. The demand is less a way of addressing the call for recognition of the other. The other can never give this gift transposed to the realm of political demands. Framing reserves a classically liberal presupposition regarding demand and agency. The presupposition that demand is a way of exerting agency, and that the more firmly the demand is lodged, the greater the projection of the agential effect. The Lacanian freedom sees exactly the opposite. The more firmly one lodges the demand, more desperately one clings to the legitimate ability of the institution to fulfill. A demand ought to reach a kind of breaking point where the inability of an institutional proper response should reproduce a re-evaluation of the economy of demand and desire. This moment of subtraction where the manifest content is stripped away, the desire that underwrites it is laid bare. The point is to bring the subject to a point where they might recognize and name their own desire and become a political subject and be able to truly argue for something without being dependent on the others. Organized principle for political identity. Naming is about political subjectivization, not solely oriented toward the looks of the man. The subject becomes a new kind of political possibility. Alternative subjects get fixated on the man, but they forfeit the possibility of desire. Unless analysis does not go far enough and constitute the subject of desire that leaves them straight. The hysteric is defined by incessant demands at the expense of ever articulating a desire which is theirs. The hysteric demands that the other produce an object that is supportive of aversion to one's desire, what appears as an unfettered agency as a surrender of desire by enjoying the act of figuring the other as the one with the exclusive capability to satisfy the demand of the register of manifest content. Demands are claims for action and seemingly powerful, but at the level of rhetorical form, demand is surrender. The limitation of the student's call does not align the end that they sought, but the fact that the hysterical dress never quite breaks free from the framing the massive fundamental problem of democracy is addiction to mastery and deferral to desire. Hysteria is net politically constraining because of the form of the demand. It's a way of organizing political enjoyment. The system continues to act in ways that sustain its logic case. There's no meaningful relationship between their education, agency claims, and social change. Get out of the argument room, slog. In 3, the presumption that the words of the judge produce a social reality that corresponds with the words uttered. The endlessly repeated question, what should the court do, leads students to believe that court responds to better argument when the academic loses faith in the law. Typically, the person that is most troubled, she has lost the framework that makes her academic project possible. Isn't the law that conforms to academic project established when intellectuals like to believe that the law offers interesting grammar and rhetoric through which to think about the world. This is naive. The argument room is a place where academic advocates go to argue passionately about the law and politics. Within the room, arguments are won and lost. No one outside pays very much attention to what's going on inside. Sometimes there's just seepage. Participants spend their time arguing about what should happen outside the room. This they call knowledge or politics. The one thing that generally cannot be talked about inside the room is the construction of the room itself. The concept of politics is a great deal of additional theoretical work, yet remains immune from scrutiny. This often is argued to a political position. Is not political at all. Simply triggers the scholastic meta discourse about whether arguments are sound and should be adopted. In the university scholarship attention depends on the production of new and exciting ideas and pros or problems to the left. The victims remain the same. This leads to deja vu. It seems odd that someone should feel authorized to say you should do X. The belief is that the future liberation hangs on laws. The spirit stereo gun nuts. I marked it at nuts. The rejection of state. Actually, scratch that. The idea that a single case can meaningfully alter the contours of the law. Speech is naivety means they don't ever solve, and their plan gets rolled back. Seagull and faith in 2. Although precedent is typically presented as an obligatory norm, just as rarely exceeded to it. Without which they disprove precedent does not restrict judicial discretion. Precedents are both side of most every controversy. Parties willing to take their case up because precedent won't govern a consult an appellate court case within the setting of cases will likely contain references to previously considered cases. Same for cases without dissent. The majority will note the existence of alternative lines of precedent. Griswold versus Connecticut provides an example, an innovative example of precedent's ability to use passage to create a new law that consider Cruz on the court-created constitutional right to die as the precedent. Vaccination, search medication confinement. Precedent does not restrict because it consists of the court's decision. In fact, judges may pick and choose among precedents to find those that accord with their policy preferences while asserting that the best accord with the facts. Judges disagree over what constitutes precedent. Defining the ratio, descendia, and the intersubjectively transmissible fashion seems all but impossible. Precedent provides virtually no guide to the judge's decision. Precedent will be a method good form rather than a limit on the judicial policy preferences. Precedent will not inhibit the exercise of discretion. Even the court should confront the single line of precedents.
Why are y'all here?
Just to mess around, have some fun.
Okay, vote out then.
No,
Why vote neg?
because we think having fun is better than not having fun. Oh.
Why is that a reason to vote neg?
Well, we think that you've done a bad thing. We've diagnosed some issues with your bad
What is
thing.
bad?
Well, bad is you getting caught in the repetitious cycle. We think it's important sometimes that someone intervenes
So
and says, well, you
what
shouldn't
is
do that.
why is debate the same as a protest? Why do you think the
No,
app is
no,
waiting
it's
for
not.
recognition
That's our
from the
point.
state?
No, our point is that debate is not.
Debate's even worse than a protest would be, I think, the best way
What?
to say
What?
It's a protest
Whose
where no one's
recognition?
paying
I
attention
guess
to the
whose
protest.
recognition do you think the 1AC is waiting for?
Those three.
The judges and also the external
You're
world
not.
that you
Hold
keep
on.
talking
Hold on.
about.
You're not waiting for their recognition with the ballot.
Recognition is not the same thing as the fulfillment of a desire. Our argument is that
What? No,
one,
hold on. What? Explain that. Like, you are waiting for the recognition of the ballot. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So who is the AF waiting for recognition from then?
No,
If
no,
not
no.
the judges,
Our
'cause you
argument is not
established
just
that's the
merely
same.
about recognition. It's about the relationship that the subject constitutes themselves in relation from demand and the institution that they
Okay.
place it upon.
So
Okay?
this
So
this
there
just
are
seems
two
to be like a
arguments here.
fiat illusory K. You think the state will respond, but it won't. Like, why does any of this prove that weed prohibition is good?
That is not particularly relevant.
Okay,
of a
we
question.
agree that the state will most likely not respond to our demand. What is?
I think that's totally bonkers. The idea that you have a policy here in a public arena
We're in
saying
We're in a
that
debate.
is
The
totally
question of this debate is
unfeasible,
should
even
weed
though
be
the 1AC
legalized?
started in random places and endlessly talk about this thing is entirely
Well,
unfeasible.
then I
we
come
think
back. We're here having fun, and we think it's
Fun's
not.
not the only impact. Inevitable that comes from spending too much on debate.
to some degree.
No problem. Because
Psychosis mean?
sort of relation that the that demand.
Okay, well,
So
who
what
are we
evidence-
demanding? We have just made a
They're
human
like-
right
The faction of human.
for the real.
Hmm?
What does it mean for someone?
Means for
One could
everyone.
conceivably say one of the best ways to stir the is the sort of high of the ways to break from the simple.
Okay, great.
Plan.
getting there.
I guess what basis the alt claim to end the program?
We think that saying need to leave a floating dick is the answer to that question.
I wouldn't want to.
Yeah, can't risk.
Whoops.
Precedent.
I know. From the. I'm not sure. But anyway. What?
That the alt spills up to leave the gov passes legislation. The gov goes
It might
away.
result.
No, I mean you said you'd lead to a better. Asking what that is.
Well, it's
Yeah.
more likely to.
And
But
what is the
it-
basis
but it-
upon which you're making?
Frustration of desire.
So I don't think we necessarily need I don't think we need this.
Where's my nice pen? The worst. I always lose like. I showed Anna with the Marriott pen. Oh no, I wanted the purple one.
You should have green, blue, or red.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I can't add you onto the email chain.
It's no problem. You can just forward it to me after.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I will have to excise secret Northwestern.
Y'all are welcome to be open source.
No, they're forwarding
We're being super open source. We're just sending them to anyone.
We just prefer the active.
Sometimes we accidentally
The
send it
case,
to other people.
the first one in C position, and then the second one in C position.
Sorry, case. First thing, second thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Case one.
Everyone good?
Yeah.
The one is these heuristic is valuable debates about based in advancing legal change are good. They teach us to turn our moral and political convictions into advocacy and be better subjects, even if one-shot policies like the plan are not perfect. The process itself is valuable, and the plan is a starting point, not an endpoint. That society we can reshape the law to be accountable to its ideals and describe to equality like healthcare. Schlag agrees that helps break down normativity. Schlag and what precludes anyone from suggesting Constitution guarantees healthcare. The answer can change to what we argue, and what generates change what we do. We have an imaginary legal law shaped by imaginary collective traits. If we want to work so hard to collect imagination, couldn't we pick something more interesting or aesthetically and living politically relevant than bus schedule? Couldn't we need to stay respectful within a period of no more comprehensive need to display control over social political And economic transformation is not subject to control. It has not always been like this, and maybe it does not have to be. Working within legal scholarship is the best solution. Complete rejection is much worse, exacerbates all the one sees impact. Carlson 99 shot course, but doesn't follow that he should be abolished. Legal scholarship participation from the realm of small scholarship is a very medium that practices self-confidence. Participation in legislation can be defended for participation culture. It is in work itself that values scholarship being found by working with the law systems. Academics can make it more resilient. Working law can increase positive freedom of self-gain as a place in the world. It is only a failure if we accept the task to destroy the entirety of the hierarchy. If we destroyed the hierarchy, another word would spring up, and it would have not be destroyed. Destruction would never end. Their precedent card is not about marijuana, so prefer the one to see evidence that's more specific to our actual ruling. Court action causes precedent to spill over to drugs. Shansky 7. The CSA's regulation of marijuana for any purpose, placing marijuana use outside federal control. Place any use of any drug outside federal control, regardless of whether the state allows to regulate use of the plant's precedent would be applied to other drugs, because the lower courts would do it, which answers their precedent. Are Donahue 11 in critical constitutional law. The drug position, the court also opened the door for decriminalization of other substances because the law was not limited to marijuana. Lower courts might expand the ruling to other drugs. Infusing human rights as a precedent into the drug conventions reverses the war on drugs broadly by establishing a new area of experimentation that's younger is wild. Says a legally regulated system for marijuana sets an example that breaks the back of the punitive regime because it proves efficacy and allows broader decriminalization of other drugs. The plan makes the war on drugs unsustainable. Finally, 14. Cannabis accounts for 3/4 of illicit use. It's the mainstay of the war on drugs supporting addiction efforts. Without cannabis, the war on drugs would collapse. Since only 1% of the world's population uses all the drugs combined, the expenditure would be impossible to justify. The plan's interrogation is vital to politicize and end the colonialist legacy of the war on drugs. Are moist and evidence of independent structural violence. In fact, they've conceded that the domestic war on drugs causes violent policing on the periphery as well as at home, which means that they is the DHV alternative on both the pages. First off, voting for this argument necessitates utilizing every procedure they're critiquing. Evaluating the debate requires an intersubjective frame for language, some rational standard for what arguments are better. Only making these procedures clear from the get-go, like the 1AC, allows us to actually solve verdict 11. The death of all meta-narratives is self-totalizing meta-narrative performative self-refutation occurs when an argument undercuts itself in the form of means, which the form of human is taking an effect of language, words, use lesser certain subjects, with the finality or ontology proof that people's not meta-narratives so to dismantle logocentric reason. Deconstruction is bound to recourse to logocentric reason. Could not be crossed up because reason is operative as an indistinguishable framework in the vehicle of deconstruction. This trick is having it both ways would highlight deconstruction's fatal flaw, and it has to feed on and is thus parasitically dependent on what it enables to dismantle, though its parasitic dependency from inferior logos drives deconstruct itself by revealing subslated logocentrism. All these are trapped in a cycle of a circle we can pronounce not single destructive proposal, not slip into the form of privacy word express postmodern enterprise. The land is central thing is to enlighten the enlightenment, but the totalizing nature of post-modern critique aiming at alienation, but also destruction gives rise to nothing less than great. So reason, self-cannibalization, the only end of rationalism. Politics is not impossible. Intersubjectivity and communication can still be founded as a grounding for politics. Reject their overgeneralization. Schwartz and A. Baudrillard portrayal as two-star sensation reality downplays the possibility of human communication, intersubjectivity, and intersubjective communication is possible. Why do we write journal articles for our intellectual community's ideology as a form of community is not with the weight of the form power? Legal system, social world is not a fragment, as academics believe. The academic communities implicitly affirm pragmatic conceptions of meaning that ignore and fragmentation. There's no link to any of this death stuff. Latin American populations and domestic imprisonment was the only one I see. They have not refuted the specificity means you should prefer. This argument applies equally to the negative. There's no metric to evaluate any of their claims, and we can do things now proven by the fact that there's some comprehensibility, even if it's intersubjective and not perfect one-to-one in this debate. The critique. The role of the ballot should be evaluated. The consequences of the plan versus the alternative. Reject any nebulous framework and shifting. Destroys politics, significantly aggressive, which makes particularly too easy offense impossible. Prior questions will never be fully settled. Must take actions even under conditions of uncertainty. Conquer 99 is important. We proceed analysis of material toward extending epistemological uncertainty. Important political concern hanging the balance. We cannot afford to wait for many narratives to be questioned, to be answered, nor a credible alternative. Be for an agenda, nor do we have a question of what comes first. The two can be pursued together. Reject their pick. It's one rejoinder. All shifting makes class impossible because we produce, and whenever we produce a clashing answer, they morph their alternative, making effective advocacy skills impossible as they never learn to beat a well-prepared opponent. Second half round, they steal the entirety of the 1AC without supporting evidence, so we cannot read add-ons which teams just learn how to deal with flux rather than be K-link work or advantage research, which is more valuable. Late-breaking debates or bad re-explanations of the framework after the 1AC, making it impossible for them to do exactly what they said in the 1AC if they independent reason to vote, and counter exactly what they said. Is a necessary component for resistance in the war on drugs. Political experimentation is vital and only achieved through working within institutional determines. Governmentality is good. That's O'Malley directly answers the first thing. McLean votes aft. McLean 11 needle exchanges become framed as right. Consequently, state refusal to fund harm reduction to become one. Restricted acts protection massacres for announced also active goes let die. Harm reduction actions might consider possibility going down to attain granted health and investment health of drug use is not incompatible with a broader concern for social justice. The macro level determinants of drug use and addiction. Our IHRL backing for harm reduction avoids all their links. Our admin 11 a neutral harm reduction approach offers no counter understanding contest. IHRL is a stark contrast and distract within. Human rights discourse. Harm is located in the law, not its health-related effects. A challenge to the law's epistemic to contest existing forms of needs, depression, decriminal journals, justice, normative judgment. Human rights allow the criminal laws to be challenged on the grounds of power, equality, and freedom, not merely health effects. Human rights provides a means to articulate the wrong, the criminal laws, and the normative, not simply rational terms in service of broader social change. Human rights are an ideal that are affirmative attempts to actualize through specific mobilizations, which means it's a good starting point. I'll finish sticking here politically. Internationally, I find it comfortable to is likely to serve as a class blue action unless it ventures something more than we can risk a political proposal without that it's elimination policy or an alternative critique tells us we don't want to without supporting the comparison of lumps, right? Policy colonialism does not prevent any elements to these one policy and other critical accounts tend to be normative theorizing following or ranking some of the conservative and the critique here say political difference between policy that funds preference between policy that critiques and collective military policy to be interesting by these standards real policy by prevalent church in the reality took its regime as he didn't election amount of change he encouraged in some cases but at least he didn't other doty no criteria to distinguish between policy Kissinger, Carter, and Bush critique demobilize the support we might have for policy. It puts the analyst in an ethically comfortable position by not by posing any implicit comparison, demobilizing what we learned to critique. But we don't have any word to support the result can be demobilizing specific policy demands and tying it to the state are necessary to solve our 1AC. You have to make that's the only way to make ILAW discourse revolutionary. It's better than the old Roswell intend. What can left-wing international law scholars do to help ILAW discourse by producing policy statements by intervening in the legal doctrinal and reshaping the landscape of popular experience? Not only can readers of the esoteric paper journals, but also our ILAW international law project consists of academics. So sometimes we have single straw and to break the camel back. Only need one place to place the experimentation with different advocacies is a gateway to successful organizing. The 1AC's heuristic of state engagement is necessary for that. Commonly 13 is tempting to forego electoral politics because it's so dysfunctional, but to do so cedes too much power to the right. The right loves to make politics dysfunctional, to make people lose confidence, transfer the private sector. The electoral will cannot be ignored, having to recognize it would be wise to start macro experimentation on several fronts. One, that connects individuals and institutions' roles, constituting institutions makes a pillar from which we run our institutions which set roles experimentation can be held that precondition for participation in more robust local movement role experimentation can regulatory institution regulatory future protection touching based can states for large scale class experimentation make models different primary capacities for other domains of life as executively we can try to join macro political movement somewhat alter the performance acceptably at roles institutions and larger structure involved in which limiting others just capitalists give advantages key advantages. It may seem that we must embrace a system with further and draw on way to explicit the hegemony of neoliberal ideology reinforce such reading of alternatives.
Do I need now?
Just be like, they're assholes to tell drug users to look.
Yeah, the alt is a total assholery and locks in the status quo. Embraces the war on drugs that views addiction as a matter of individual responsibility, which discounts the role of political institutions in modern life and reduces politics to an individual project of ethical self-improvement, which makes zero sense in the context of all of our drug users. Advantages in the 1AC. The next. Yeah. Permutation to the plan and all non-mutually exclusive parts of the alternative. Permutation to the plan as part of breaking apart the fantasy of intervention and death. The K. We don't need that card. Human rights are plural. If imbued with a pluralizing, democratizing ethos, they can alter political practice. Obviously, they're not magic, but they are necessary contributions to make that. They're Hunt and Hoover evidence. So the psychoanalysis stuff, there's no link to this death drive argument. None of the 1ACs were about that. Their argument proves that they're the ones obsessed with death. Finding it in the 1AC where it doesn't exist. Psychoanalysis is not empirical, has no explanatory power. Prefer social science in the 1AC style of 7. Psychoanalytic problems begin with their informed empathy, explanatory predictive power of the ideas are to interfere with subject criticism. The subject empirical time would be a gross misuse to word social science. The question was like, be explanatory, but only labels refer to some uniformity, travel, foreign country, import. Trying to labels have explanatory value because we know what they refer to. Mark that refer to. The alternative fails. There's no way psychoanalysis can be scaled up and change the human psyche or broader politics. Political projects of self-creation must be tethered from the outset to advocate for institutional change. Myers, 13 self-RC is a condition of change of macro level, not only avoids question of self-reflection, but also looks at the extra way to opportunities to mistake to break common applies ethical self-reflection. How self-intervention going to get up to stop tethered from beginning public things about direct attention to the problem defined as changeable. Mark that changeable. McGowan votes for the permutation. You can integrate the K's insights into the 1AC. The death drive is absurd nonsense. Woodrow, and the purpose is not that seeking, but preservation of self from isolation has been concept. That instinct is useless and perverse and scientifically unjustified. The theory flies in the face of evolution because it makes no sense. Love and hate are motivation total works and not particles itself.
Mark that particles itself.
Okay. You ready?
Yep.
Alright, so you read a card that says the plan's precedent could be applied to other drugs. I'll read it. In declaring an unconstitutional law for drug position, the court opened a door for possible decriminalizations of other substances. Lower courts might expand the ruling to other drugs. You have a card that says they will do that.
Yeah, the 1AC cards that say that when you apply
those
IHL
1AC cards all
the
seem
single
to
convention.
assume the antecedent, though, because they say the reason...
None of these cards are talking about the scope of the 1AC's ruling.
Let me finish the question, which is to say they all assume that judges pay attention to what other judges do in the course of constructing their
None
decision.
of our cards necessarily say that.
So
the
how do you
2AC cards
create
I've
a
read,
spillover argument?
Because the 1AC cards say the single convention, when you inject IHRL into that, that's sufficient to convince people on the other drugs to move in that direction
I'm
as well.
asking,
It's different
do you have
than
a
court
card
precedent.
that says that that's how people act
The
in
plan's
relationship
ruling
to the
itself
law?
applies IHRL over the entire single convention.
Yeah.
It doesn't require future precedents.
Future precedent?
I read these cards just as backup when you inevitably go for this precedent spillover argument. We have cards that likely the lower courts would also
So no precedent if we
if you win that, you don't beat the advantage.
There's
It's
no
not necessary.
your last internal link besides that is sort of you infuse.
There's 3 internal links. So there's one that's like, are the courts going to follow precedent? Not super important if we win the first one before that, which is how the single convention will be interpreted when IHRL supersedes the way
How do
we
you
do
guide that
drug policy.
interpretation? How do you guide that active interpretation?
We have the cards in the
1AC.
1AC that says when we use
Your cards don't
IHRL.
say about how other judges will.
It's
literally
not about
don't.
judges. The single convention is how we
How
apply
other
punitive drug
lawmakers will
policy.
appropriate
Yeah, and our
law.
cards say when you put human rights before punitive policies.
So what's the
and
third thing? Sorry.
The third thing is just the regulatory experimentation warrant from both the wild evidence and the new 2AC card. That's
What
like,
is the
if we
function?
prove it works for marijuana,
So,
it
okay,
can
so
work
just
elsewhere.
experimentation. Sure.
Yeah.
What is the function of these two cards about Baudrillard against our first argument?
That card
only
answers
one.
the argument that intersubjective communication is impossible.
We didn't say that though.
The one
We
in
said
C's
that you
first
didn't
position
prove,
is that
we said that you didn't meet the burden of proof for the 1AC. Where did we say anything about language?
we think that card sets up a framework for intersubjective communication. If the
We don't
judges
care
got
about intersubjective
if
communication.
the,
That's not
well,
our
we,
argument.
we do.
Oh,
It's
okay.
the foundation for our claims. If the judges understood the
The
reason to
foundation
vote,
that
shut
the
up.
things
If
that
the
you talked
judges
about exist
understood
is
the
the
reason to vote F as of the end of the 1AC, that's
So
sufficient.
understanding is the fact that they understood what you said means it's real.
No, you
What-
can obviously
you
contest
were
the
the
reality
You
of
did,
those
and then
things.
you dropped. Okay.
We didn't
fine,
know.
fine.
You didn't contest anything about Latin America. You read card 0 about the 1AC, which is
That's
why
not our burden.
yeah,
It's
it is
your
your
burden
burden
to
to
prove that it
disprove
exists.
rejoinder. That was the argument
Alright.
on the PICS
I
debate,
get
which
it.
applies
Anyway,
here. You did
so
not meet that
Connolly
burden.
13 says we have to not forego electoral politics. Are you doing electoral politics right now?
That's the first line of the card. If you keep reading, it's like we shouldn't just
Are
assume
you
because
participating in robust political movements?
we
Or
would
an artistic
say this is a
movement that
public
conducts political
space, so
purpose.
yeah, this is a space where we can talk
No,
about
no, no.
political
When I
change.
asked Miles in the 1AC, we were like, "Why do you want the plan?" He was just like, "I don't know."
This card is like fantastic for us. Role experimentation can help set the preconditions for participation in other political movements.
So it's not
Yeah, but you're not even
necessarily
doing role experimentation. All you were doing, you were just
The whole
like,
point of our
it's a
framework
game.
argument-
We want to win the game.
That
Why
is role
that?
experimentation.
Yeah, the game is like
That's the
taking
definition of that.
taking the res and coming to a contingent conclusion about it. That's the role experimentation we're talking about.
Yeah.
I'll get that one again. I think that's improved.
Forgive me. What are the cards for the other two internal link arguments that aren't precedent?
So wild, and then I read a card in the 2AC.
So wild is the experimentation one.
There's another one in the 2AC that I read.
Okay, so those two for the experimentation.
and
And which
then-
one is the like infused?
So Youngers as well as
Younger.
Yoder,
Youngers and Yoder. Sounds like a
as
good
well
band.
as Hobson.
All right, now let's not get crazy.
No, I'm telling you, literally every one of these cards are out
No,
of
no, no. Okay, so and Hobson is that it?
And let me just check to make sure there's no other ones.
Sure.
Theory arguments.
Picks bad. Shiftiness. Alt like
Shiftiness.
alt mood like if the alt changes from the 1C explanation.
Okay. I'm done.
So wait, sorry.
That's it.
So Youngers, Yoder's,
three.
Hobson.
We started again.
Wild and the 2AC card.
Yep.
That's done. 145. Use. Sign this.
So how much did we use?
We used 146 actually.
Messed up, man.
Well, you know how inbox sometimes, like, sometimes you can drag it and sometimes you can't drag it?
You can't drag it. You can't drag it into the small box. You can drag it into the big box.
Well, you know, I at least agree with you that that's the biggest failing with inbox.
Yes.
That it doesn't have single attachments well.
Right. The other one is it.
Oh, someone just Googled me on academia. Alright, I sent it out. Let me know when you get it.
Did you hear
That
about
may be
this
like the
crazy
most bold
academia.edu
thing I've ever heard.
thing where, like, you
Well,
can
no, the funny part is that someone from Evanston, Illinois, visited my academia.edu profile like 1,000,000 times right before the NET, and it was so weird because I was like, who would be doing that? Who would be interested in me so much, you know? But anyways, so let me know when you're It'll be, sorry, this is the most sheets of paper I've taken in a very long time. It'll be the schlag part of the case, and then the original Gorgias K page, and then the psychoanalysis page.
just gonna do a little roll experimentation. Sorry, let me pull it up too, just in case you don't finish, which is inevitable.
It's a very optimistic speech, I think.
Did you just send them this?
No.
Yeah, that's all you sent.
Oh, that's funny.
Are there other cards?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was actually, apparently I just planned to reread the one in C-Link argument.
We were fine with
I
that.
know Miles was just like, oh my god, what are they gonna do?
Okay,
I mean,
I
it's
really
really not different
sent
than anything
it.
you normally do.
I really sent it this time.
I need to be resentful, Miles. This looks more correct.
Yes, okay.
I hate it when you don't tag your cards. Okay, let's go.
Ready?
There's a tag. You just removed it. Oh, that's even worse.
Alright,
Just go, just go.
It's an argument. Alright.
Yeah, that's fair.
Voting issue for cowardice.
All of the arguments about training us with skills means they cannot win the debate. The debate is just a game of wins and losses with no question what kinds of politics and ethics we engage in. That'll be clear later on. Your healthcare argument says that since everything is imaginary, we should choose an interesting imaginary thing that skips the bottom part of the Schlag article where he says the less cheery ending is that the politics they're engaging in is relatively useless. Now, two conceded warrants from article Schlag evidence from the one and see there's no connection between in-round prescription and out-of-round solvency. The legal system is predisposed to ignoring plan-style advocacy. The repeated assertion that prescription is politics locks academics inside a circular and failed mode of subjectivity. The in-round impact is massive violence. Schlag and nine them a training for mediocrity does serve a social function, good judgment, reasonable stuff, out thinking that legal academics thus playing the role of Sisyphus and main drive. The Sisyphus had real rock the law. Professors push a fake up rock up the hill or min. The imaginative construction their own making pushes symbolic rockets substantially easier. It's fake. It's claims success. The symbolic nature makes it transparently more pointless. Why care about the scholars? Scholarship plays an important role in shaping the ways the students think about the law. If they're taught to think in essentially mediocre ways, they'll respond those ways. As they practice law and politics, they are repeating standard moves. They will be wielding power in essentially mediocre ways. When mediocrity and doubt great power yields massive violence. And second is that it's uniquely better to abandon prescriptions and proffer good descriptions of the system and context. This frees us from the vampiric dependence on failing legal structures. The judge should not conceive of their roles in imaginary implementation of the politics, but instead an ethical reassessment of the self. Schlag in 96, the identification with the figure of the judge's incapacity produces a false empowerment. The judge believes the law sets her not obvious regular relation to the field of application, self-identification, and thinker with. The judge deals with the juridical composition map of the body, self-identification, includes any critical assessment of the categories in relation to law, legal empowerment, legal thinkers provide utopian assessment, and they know what consequences legal thoughts believe they're own studying law, they're doing law, this is under rights. The belief among the leaders think that prescribing solutions is somehow useful way to alter the behavior of legal actors and the conscious that makes this. The judge's belief that the effectiveness of legal order, judicial orders, legal thinker, imitates justice, commanding the concluding scholarship work, and therefore somebody should. Now, the Gorgias page. You should treat this argument seriously because they didn't, then they should lose on it. The affirmative cannot win unless they beat the 5 Gorgias arguments contained in the sexist empiricist evidence. First, they say the plan does not exist, that there is no such thing as non-existence, because if the non-existence existed, then it would be non-existent, which means that they can't establish inherency. That was conceded. Second, the existent does not exist either, because if it did either have to be eternal, thus limitless and everywhere, and thus nowhere, or generated, and thus limited, and thus contained, and thus a product of complete non-existence, which is impossible. Now, third, even if things exist, we cannot apprehend them, because apprehension happens in a different register than the thing itself, being a product of consciousness, and therefore is not the same thing as the existence of the object in the world. Finally, if things exist and we apprehend them, we cannot communicate them because we say them through logos, which is a substance that is singular. Their only answer is a card that says that Derrida is wrong, which isn't responsive. The second, the Schwartz evidence says that Baudrillard is wrong about fragmentary modernity, that's usefulness in academic articles, but none of these evidence establish the baseline that things actually exist, because, which was sort of answered and explained in those cards above, which means that they should lose on presumption. It's not a reason to vote F. That doesn't make any sense. If they're just wrong, they lose. You also conceded death is not real because if death existed, the inexistent would exist, and the inexistent cannot exist, which means you also vote. It means you also lose in presumption. Final game. The next game. The alphas conceded our agential fantasy thesis, which means they've already lost the debate, filtered their framework and solved the claims through the lens. The debate's commitment to concrete proposals and pragmatism is a fantasy that hides our agential incapacity. Debate is not doing things, it's about talking about what we would do if we were someone else. This mediation comforts us by making the ballots into electoral votes. It hides a staunch passivity and investment in status quo. Debaters live in a world where good things like the end of the Cold War threaten our access to nuclear war impacts, while 9/11 offers new impact tools rather than engage in continued political struggles. The rhetorical space is condemned to repetition, compulsion. The yearn for the world to remain exactly the same. So the good has to remain good. The desire for the status quo turns the F and means their politics are just have to affirm about, though they will snipe the validity of parts of psychoanalysis, you default neg, absent a competing story of what subjects are and how they behave. We've conceded. They have conceded two sort of foundation points. First, we become subjects through our inauguration into language, a prison that alienates us from fulfilling our desire. There was always a slippage between what I want and what I say I want. Fantasy is the set of stories we tell and identify with in order to cover over this fundamental lack. Society is a network of billions of failures in fantasy. The arrest dead card that they conceded applies to international human rights law, and the presumption is that the letter of the law will determine all of our future actions, but it fails to take into account that you feel the sort of constituent failure between the text of the law and the act by reducing the latter to the form of the obscene understood.
side of the laws when we affirm the logic of human rights in order to justify invasions into Iraq and Afghanistan. Human rights are a signifier that the United States simply re-signifies to justify invasion of various forms of negative politics. Now, second is that subjectivity is determined by the death drive. It's not a desire for death, but a repetitious failure to acquire the object of desire. Each time Suo finds a woman of his dreams, another more enticing website appears. The death drive determines our politics because each attempt to inaugurate an ideal system tells constitutive failure. The affirmative shields this failure in fantasy. The garbage symbolic legal power represented by Fiat, the thesis of a colossal foreign policy, phantasmatic repression creates real violence. Attempts to eliminate Al-Qaeda create ISIS, after secure hegemony create hostile rivals. Refusal to come to terms with this structure causes extinction, which is conceded theme evidence from the one, and see now the critique neutralizes the ab's fantasy and restructures their politics in light of the death drive. The no of the neg ballot solves in two ways. First, it offers a blockage in desire that affords the app the enjoyment of the death drive, an enjoyment that only emerges through frustration. That's the Lundberg card. The second is that the no acts to shatter a gentle fantasy and reorient our investment of desire into contingent politics outside of debate. It forces us to realize that the set of symbolic justifications we typically provide for our affirmance, i.e. extinction, violence, violence, genocide, all skirt the real question whether we would ethically endorse a court legalization based on human rights discourse in our daily existence and why we would feel motivated to defend it. Framework. The role of the ballot is to analyze libidinal investments of the one sees politics and presentation before considering whether its implementation would be a good idea. If the app is a good idea, you vote no because the easy flow towards the good produces complacency. The role of the judge is to be an analyst. The app have presented their case. We have offered an interpretation. The judge either agrees with interpretation through the validation of the ballot or does not. The post round will serve as the sort of analytic portion of the debate. Now, the framework is the essential structure of fascism intent to such that catastrophic violence becomes possible. In the name of saving the polity, landed latest from falling prey, such things safer to change hands. The fascism is not so much a symbol of political struggle for autonomy, self-management, hide from the ocean. The might be a political response. Fashion makes me illustrious. Politics has never even did he see more pompous assholes to make joy? The process of accumulation which leads to hatred flow through nine. The university discourse to brief bureaucracy and rationalize the way value of the knowledge economy consciously has become when the master's knowledge workers are pitted against one another. Competition first above the modern master takes hold. The university discourse commands other not only counter engagement, some action deemed to be good. What is being demanded is you must do this. You must not only get something out of it, you must get off on it. Two subject desires are not threatening. Responsibility to result from the academic achievement. The other two is doomed to failure and suffer consequence for failure. The alienation. The more I pursue enjoyment, the more I realize how little I actually enjoy. The third is simulation confusion. This is Koenigs and 12. Human ingenuity made it possible to create all kinds of fakes and simulations. The realists is getting hard to distinguish them from what they imitate. The sheer number of simulations is changing our psychology. We now routinely experience simulation confusion, which meant to imitate simulation to become the great substitute. Anything we can't get from the world we seek now in simulation, personally confused and energized by a multitude of committing discourse. Very the innate simulation confusion are types of mistake faceful. They problems ability to create deceptive simulation that's becoming by the essential that those who let themselves be taken in or doomed. The media offer the photo universe of electronic images, the theoretical situation which portrayals need not include any reference to morals or limits, since everything is our made or mere appearance, everything is possible because none of it happens, and we see the emerging techno which everything is possible as pretense and audience are being offered a new twist on the classical battle between upright Dr. Jekyll and malevolent Mr. Hyde. We can all become Mr. Hyde, vicarious experience unbridled evil in a world of electronic images and simulation. We can then return to reality without having compromised our moral identity. Symbolic arenas or protected domains that make it possible for people to cut out their fantasy ways that are possible in everyday life. Many symbolic arenas or acts of world repair they allow us to face and overcome simulated danger, which are more exciting version of what we face in our everyday life. We convert our defeats into victories and our lost into gains. Symbolic arenas allow us to play out every other kind of desire, power, failure, trust, and revenge. What would otherwise have been denounced as unending except in the name of experimentation? A culture contrives to specialize and create the appearance of values places their substance promise gives and escape from the limits of life. This culture offers phony transcendence promises everything for nothing, manipulative image construction, and a very dangerous political consequence. Stereotype then choose exploiter pre-Hitler, German socio-political dissents, the imperial state of the Soviet Union, the left sympathies, anti-American, the intellectual. The Cultural Revolution, all stereotypes tend to be lies. The John told mystery and wretched years with dead bodies and destruction. Now, the idea that debate is just a game and something can be considered good because it's a good idea. Absent our psychic investments and health, advocacy constantly fails to think why certain desires cause an arena for political simulation, which is now the floating pig. We don't link. We never said we would do the plan. It's a sort of result of the alternative solvency. Now, our policy might difference because we need to win some with their assumption of sort of is a crucial link to the critique verb check. The argument is this proof it hasn't done much to change our mind. It says we need political proposals. This card that we use our political process in order to mobilize for change. The apps explicitly conceded that they're not engaged in any sort of movement for change. They don't even believe in their own argument. They say specific politics elsewhere and you're intervening into a legal debate because none of those scholars care about your work. Now, Connolly, in Connolly's terms is artistic and political movements that engage in structures like protests. All of these cards link to the Lundberg thesis, which is that the app is addicted to the structure of the demand but refuses to fill that content with the actual desire. They say we're assholes, but you are the ones who reduce drug use to a question of self-affirmation, which is the sort of harms reduction debate that'll be clear in Suo's speech to be. If we win, we are a better way of actualizing your politics, and you're the assholes because you are the ones who are pretending to care about the drug users but not actually doing anything. The permutation, it's either do both or its efforts are intrinsic, otherwise they spike all links, causes horrific intellectual responsibility. We're criticizing the only advantage, which means that you should defend your method and your representation. That the alternative to say no to the affirmative question of rhetoric, so any combination of the two still means you vote negative. Any bullshit, like mutually exclusive parts doesn't make any sense because it's all mutually exclusive. The one error has to explain what the function and meaning of the permutation is for you to consider it inside of this bit. All of the link arguments and all of the theoretical arguments are also reasons why the permutation is unstarted. Now they say that psychoanalysis is wrong, but
I will answer that.
he will answer that. They say Sadovnikism, which is relevant to Sadovnikov and 7, nor did I question the use of psychoanalysis and social science. My target's pronounced attempt, I did not make any generalizations. Mark the generalizations, we'll take a couple seconds of proof.
Yeah, so do you want me to read this card?
Just make the second
With this.
argument on
Let's put
Sadovnikov, and then read.
I don't have this stuff. I don't have you did this version. It's the same. I can't find it. There were no answers.
Okay. The dog have non-falsifiable. And just minors until bill passes not Okay, done. 42 seconds.
Okay. So, why is the 1AC driven by the death drive?
The 1AC, we are all, I suppose, driven by the death drive. I wouldn't say
I know,
the
but all
1AC
the
is
examples,
particularly.
sure, all of the examples in the 2NC are like big impacts in debate, eliminating Al Qaeda, big wars. Why was the 1AC any of those?
I guess I don't understand quite your question. Our point is not that you are the death drive, but that you fail to take into account the death drive, which is the constitutive failure of all our politics to meet with the fantasy
My
image
question
we
is,
have
how
of
does the
them.
1AC, why does the 1AC fail?
Well,
Just look at the links there.
that's the Lundberg argument, which is that the 1AC's demand makes the institution that it knows will never be responded to, and then in
Here, Lundberg evidence is
cycle.
talking about WTO protesters. Like, they are obviously expecting a demand in response, yeah?
Actually want the way that they don't want the change to debate by saying that the way that debate functions, that we hope for the status quo to remain the same, because the AF that you've been reading all year would actually not be. So you continue reading the same AF and just change your justifications for it. But the point is that
This is extinct.
extrapolated to the international.
How does that work? So you're like, it's all.
The DEMU evidence is actually pretty good about how international human rights law have the same fundamental anxieties and sort of
Why do
functions
you get
of-
to make those impact claims when you're saying it's only a question of debate, like debate about debate?
Well, we can still policies of the world.
So why can't we do the same thing?
We're not saying you can't analyze.
Okay, so
What is the difference between analysis and prescription?
You have made a specific claim of what the United States federal government should do, and you've situated that as a call for a certain kind of response. We are an analysis of that call and the way that you have formulated your demand.
So
in
the
relation
role
to
of the
institution.
ballot is the gauging libidinal investments. How do the judges do that?
We are offering an interpretation of your libidinal investments. The judges are analysts, and they offer a sort of understanding of that interpretation.
What
they agree with it.
guidelines do they use? Do they
Well,
have
I
them?
suppose if you win your arguments that we are all rational individuals who can engage in communication, they would use those same rational principles to analyze
So
the
which
investments
ones are
that,
those? 'Cause
that.
both the 1AC.
Well, again, you've said it's all about good debating, and if we make a good interpretation, you are acting.
Why is NDT prohibition?
Realization that the demand does not lead to the content would require you to actually engage in the types of politics that your authors say are necessary, and if you don't, it just proves you.
And
In
you should
what
vote
way
for
solve the app?
Well, I think that the ideatorial protest about marijuana.
How do you know we haven't
Yeah,
done that?
how do you know any of this
I
stuff?
think it's pretty
Are you just
clear.
ascribing identity? Know what products of the war on drugs.
Also done in the war on drugs, but more importantly, that you will win, that you have a big pragmatic politics against.
Okay, so what are you doing here? All
We're
right.
just having fun.
Oh, well, there you go.
My goodness, what am I doing?
Fill this up really quick.
Okay, yeah, I'm sending the one in. Let me know when you get it. My internet's messed up. It's gonna be the bottom of the K. Arms reduction, link turn thing. Actually, I'll do that last. I'm just gonna start where he came. Maybe that's easier. I don't know.
Are you saying words?
But you said the email.
And then the case. I did send the email.
Nice.
Does that make sense to everyone, or have you already given up on
Is it just like
the structure?
bottom of the K and then the case?
Yeah.
Sure, okay. I think I got that.
There was a caveat, but it's not really that important. Sorry, give me a second. My foot's asleep. Oh, whatever. All right. Everyone good? They read a long card that starts with an S. I don't really know what it's about, but the second argument that we have is that the idea that concepts don't matter unless they change the world begs the question of our framework arguments. If we win, then the performance of the 1AC has zero effect on the world besides the sort of continued circulation discourses. Then there's only a risk that our theory produces a more productive orientation. Now go to the ability in social science. First is our rhetorical science understanding of psychoanalysis, result psychoanalysis of science that is falsifiable. Lundberg and science respond to critics who flame psychoanalysis as unfounded in theories and inherent practices argue that analytic practice was non-falsifiable. Psychoanalysis is a science based on the attention to repeatable logical forms of rhetoric. Offers psychoanalysis as a special kind of science by providing the set of techniques for paying attention to mathematical qualities of discourse and observation and concrete functions of trope in the social life of the subject. What is a particular object around which the science of oratory might emerge? The economy of trope and enjoyment. What is distinct about positive science is in quantification but combinatory mathematization. The science of oratory discovers knowing that makes linguistics the most advanced of human sciences. Understanding rhetoric science, these centers the subject is taken for granted maximum, replacing attention what goes on with exactly this is symbolic. Is machine and promise of the various failures that invent trope as a compensatory function, which means that the specific piece of evidence about our rhetorical inflection of confidence, just generic Freud unconscious, not scientific is not enough. This independently turns their offense, turns all their framework arguments, which also aren't falsifiable and flail ever. Every standard of social science must in aid falsified as a single most intransigent issue in getting normative theory and empirical research to speak to one another. Deliberative theory for some deliberation is intrinsic good. Such a claim renders empirical research irrelevant. Deliberative theory falls short of meeting three requirements for production. Social theory clearly defined concepts, specification of logical relationship among concepts, and consistency of hypothesis and evidence accumulation. When theories cannot meet these criteria, they're generally unproductive. When empirical researchers attempt to translate deliberative theory into these terms, they discover a great deal of conceptual ambiguity about what qualifies as deliberate. Tests deliberative theory do not develop well-specified explanations for the relationship between benefits. This also means that unless they have social science backing up every single one of their internal link claims, that you shouldn't solve it. They say that they infuse human rights law into the single or over the single convention treaty. I don't know what this means. That they do not have a single piece of scientific evidence which says that how people react in this question. I will read a bunch of cards about social science that say that how judges react in the face of precedent, which means that you should default to that on the question of solvency as well. Now Myers says that we should ignore the personal and political connection. We don't. They do. That's our gaming argument. Tudd interview with McGowan concedes that the death drive is real, which means that we'll concede that part, and they read it. So the death drive is real. McGowan says that political structures can evolve these insights. That justifies voting for the neg. They are not political agents. They're armchair politicians. The model of communication fails. McGowan for prohibition establishes. Fine, never mind about that. There was the hell evidence says that first wrong about the death drive, not that we automatically all want to die. That was explained above. Their framework destroys the possibility for politics, thinking of value to life, and defense will prove our point. Absent and engagement with affect, fantasy, desire, we lose the very things that give us meaning. Rudy, 14 symbolic violence exceeds the ubiquitous violence of the signifier. Lacan identifies the underpinning of the social order is dominated by the ideal of productivity and the direct opposition to the pleasure principle, the morality of the master measure. The merit applies on pragmatic criteria. The model citizen shows up at work and does not let his society get the better of productivity and seeks satisfaction in social section with a level-headed utilitarian subject revolutionary change to be unrealistic. Unrealistic. Now the harms reduction thing where their evidence, they don't read the conclusory part of the evidence which says that the language of biological citizenship may be not incompatible. However, it is too dangerization of the user's political and social existence. The more the rest of the sort of link analysis will done in the two. See now the case. No precedent. They have 2 ways. They have 3 ways of solving here, but precedent is one of them. Systemic empirical studies confirm precedents. Basically, no influence on how judges actually make decisions. Here's more evidence on that question. Single space and 2 when a new precedent diverges from justice and preferences of justice will support about 12% of the time. This could readily occur to other factors that have nothing to do with precedent. In a case where justice preferences conflicted with precedent, justice supported the precedent. Just 9.9% of landmark cases, the results are significant and P is less than 0.0012. The minor extent that precedential behavior existed is more likely to be found in cases of low assailants when justice must confirm overturning previous decisions. Justice over deferred precedent. They never will. The result could not be more clear. The liberal precedent. Liberals insist that liberals insist that precedents be upheld. Conservative inclination request barely votes to overturn conservative precedents. Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas defer to neither. Not one deference to precedents. This chapter finds virtually no evidence for concluding that justice decisions are based on legal factors. They have also dropped our rollback claim, which is devastating. 1 and C. If it's true that justice won't apply precedents, then they will simply issue another ruling that says that human rights law does not overturn the single convention, because that's their stated sort of policy preference right now. Which means that if we win, that the justices are not bound by precedent. That simply another ruling will overturn their thing, and they have conceded that functionally rolls back the plan. This is a piece of evidence that specifically this mechanism occurs in real policy practice. Hansford and won the decision to overrule results from the justice between a precedent and subsequent court increases the chance of we have overruled prior decisions. I think that this is devastating use on the case, and they should be able to answer all of our 1 and C arguments. Other stuff argument viable. How do you know whether something is? How do you know whether they create the sort of non-scientific claims? You should default to how people actually behave in this instance. Arguments that rolled back as well because they confusing everyone, not allowing experimentation, and it wouldn't actually sort of affirm the sort of moral rights law, which is what they say. They have a structural violence claim, but the if we win any of our framework arguments, that this is irrelevant. However, they also, if we win our precedent arguments, they also don't solve structural violence because the United and the part of legalization will only cause the shift. Marijuana will encourage the black market. Increase young people who are selling drugs because they have no not be able to participate. That's a way to circumvent charges. Any changes. Continuing organizing step 1 step forward has resulted in 2 steps back for communities of color in New York because the price of marijuana started climbing. The poor people started turning to other kinds of drugs. Those drugs will get painted as the worst possible drugs on the planet. We're not talking about the root issues of racism and classism. There are bound to be unintended consequences of marijuana legalization. Is not the global drug prohibition regime in general. Mirroring 14 consequences came from the illegal markets for marijuana, cocaine, heroin, meth. The legalizing marijuana addresses of the problem might not reduce the negative effects of prohibition. Marijuana legalization leads authorities to increase their enforcement efforts in other drug markets. Violence, corruption, other ills due to prohibition may increase, while marijuana legalization exacerbates the problem it claims to reduce. Anything else?
No, I mean, there's 6 seconds. It's fine.
All right.
4 or 2. Okay, we're good. 156.
All right, the order's the case.
Is it case K1, K2?
Oh no, I didn't.
Thank you.
Surprise!
Not yet. Yeah.
Joke in one of our they were like monster card cutter like Conor, and I had no idea like why that was mentioned. Anyone in the room? He's like, we were supposed to be funny because it was so false.
Every anime girlfriend.
That's the dream, really.
Alright.
So we shall.
So, case. Case. Alrighty. The Twacey concessions have to determine you should hold them to the Twacey location as an argumentative means you should hold them to the ABC that determines how you vote. If first they conceded the press that actually very good at sets of liberal laws, or once it's spilled over, they set the validity of various forms of claims we have no social scientific justification for the belief that precedents will spill over, just a sort of generic fantasy. Liberal law will not be changed. Our point is also they've also conceded the secondary level the Fiat question doesn't solve this. It'll be literally rolled back afterwards. Question of how the court will reinterpret the various the structures of the law to undermine the sort of which is not something that can be solved by Fiat, but has a lot of things take out all their other internal links, term more broadly, etc., or they say that it's an our point is that the project itself failed, so that it should sort of believe in it anyways. Now they say they have this impact turn the act relationship to the sort of affective appeals that they will rely on the two error. The two error will repeatedly say things like, oh my God, this is how legal scholarship always justifies itself by the emotional appeal to who believes that they can the call upon the other two render those things actualized, but it takes weightage to the real leads to a repetition conceded the independent mediocrity mediocre form of politics and education, where we become obsessed with our own agential fan card to create the world, but we never actually massive forms of violence because the mediocre often on the framework debate and the truancy and obsessed with the simulation itself. As they fundamentally concede a card, I read quite a bit of this card, and it says that we become obsessed with the idea that what we were talking about, what we simulate our from our sort of our ordinary lives, that we can engage, go into the simulation room, talk about the simulation cycle, which means that the alternative is independently valuable simply by saying no to the affirmative for sort of political advocacy, realizing the output, which is something that do it once in this debate, not simulation confusion also leads to violence, which conceded impact argument. We'll only go for one argument here for an existing candidate existed under the existence they wouldn't exist, which is sort of fundamental. These are communication works. We will concede that communication is obviously possible, but the point is that they can't actually prove anything works, or that the affirmative creates any sort of change otherwise, because the affirmative has already happened, which means the affirmative has spoken itself into existence, is not inherent anymore, and you simply vote negative presumption. Now the final the agential fantasy thesis was conceded. They have conceded our theory of how intersubjectivity works. A very good piece of Lumberg evidence from the 1NC indicates that we are fundamentally defined in relation to the symbolic order, with symbolic separates us from our desires. We try to mobilize those by identifying with certain signifiers and invest our subjectivity into certain modes of practice in relationship to those signifiers. They have conceded the sort of basic, they've conceded the sort of twincy frame, which is that they need an alternate theory in order to take out argument. They might have evidence that says like the death drive doesn't exist. They have no fundamental framing, which is that they are the exact kind of politics that the WT approaches aren't engaged in anything, but instead become invested in the cause. Now they've conceded the alternative independently solves blockage in the relationship of the desire between the affirmative and their policy. That no to the affirmative makes it more likely that their policy becomes actualized. This is not a floating. They win the entirety of the framework debate. Question of which of these leads to repetition compulsion. That's flash outs, but our point is that we become obsessed with certain to relate to their actualization. He says we don't do any linker debates here, but he's conceded their Aristotle linking us from the twincy, which indicates that we stick to the letter of the human rights law, but that justifies the United States using that letter in order to justify further intervention and violence, which turns the sort of peaceful nature of the affirmative, which is a conceded link turn argument that did not have a response to the framework debate. First is libidinal, the role of battle is about the libidinal engagement with the economy. They've conceded the Lumberg card says that it's not a question of like analyzing people's minds, but instead the way that their tropes relate to certain political actions. Those are scientific claims, which is a conceded framing argument, because it's just a question of how those tropes repeat and how we can diagnose the repetition, which is the fundamental question of science. They've conceded the Mutt's evidence, which indicates that their theory of deliberative democracy, the way that deliberation causes us to become political, is fundamentally non-falsifiable, which was the standard they again said, which means that there's no reason you should believe that their type of politics or their type of debate has any sort of validity. He says that fairness is important, but our point is that the question of politics determines the question of fairness, because we shouldn't have an entirely fair event if the point is that fair event does nothing in order to relate to the broader world. That's not a reason. We once again, we're not a floating pick, which means it's not a voting issue. He says multiple kinds of sort of like affective appeals. We have to save these people. We have to engage in politics. Our point is that you do not engage in politics. You talk about the politics that you do not actually do. You might want to become a sort of international human rights lawyer later, but the point is that you have not sort of met that there's not the sort of basic acceptance of that proposal. Long piece of Lavin card isn't justified. Long Lavin card isn't justified. Didn't respond to any of the arguments made in the 2NC and what weren't new should be read in the 2A and 2AC. He says vote negative, vote app. Our point is that doesn't do anything. The sort of alternative is simply to say no to the affirmative. Doesn't create any possibility. Arguments also new argument made in the one error, which means you should not, which means you shouldn't allow. Now the sort of permutation of links to all of the links we've made above framework is sort of prove why the permutation is a bad idea. The permutation, the alternative was to simply vote no in the face of the affirmative, which means that permutation recognized the death drive or permutation recognized reality don't mean anything. There's no explanation of why they solve any of the links to the arguments. Probably find the sort of permutation. They say they say politics is good because we can't give up on things. The Zanotti card, etc. The Connolly evidence, all these say that we should engage in political projects. But our point is that the sort of crucial precondition for engaging in those kinds of projects is to refuse the sort of call of the act. We have to situate ourselves against the logic of demand in order to create the possibility for new forms of politics. I think that frame was fundamentally conceded, which means it's literally, which means there's no way that they can get to the actualization that they say would solve these problems. There's only a risk that voting neg is better.
Strong editor.
Okay, perfect. 151.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Kind of.
Case, the first critique page, the second. Okay, everyone good?
We have the only coherent impact in this debate. Abstinence shift away from marijuana and the war on drugs. Structural violence continues on a scale at home as people are being violently policed and forced to deal with unclean water due to eradication policy. They haven't contested some of the truth claims of the 1AC that the plan can stop the U.S. leverage on the war on drugs, which means that even if some of their stuff sounds reasonable in the abstract, ask yourself how does the alternative of investing in libidinal economy apply when they've conceded some of the truth claims and have zero cards about Latin America or the domestic war on drugs. The first argument about new apps does not make any sense. We read the same internal link cards to these advantages, so they're prepared. So none of these arguments or all these arguments in the 1 year are justified by the new cards they read in the block to substantiate their claims, which massively overdevelop them from the 1 minute they spend in the 1C, which means we get new answers to that because they have new warrants, which is what our 1 AR cards are responding. Precedent does not spill over. Is not relevant to the 1AC. It's not a fantasy because our evidence cites empirics. The Burns evidence was conceded as a voting affirmative in the 1 AR, which is one of their key arguments on this. All their other cards are not about marijuana, which would be the frame through which you evaluate this debate, because all their other cards are general about liberal policies. We're the only team with the evidence that about marijuana ruling, saying that they will have a precedential effect. Secondly, independent of that, we can win just because they've conceded that the IHRL superseding the single convention applies in all areas, i.e. they've misinterpreted the plan's mechanism from the starting point. It also conceded that the plan is a starting point, not an end point, which means they have missed this whole debate. So non-reformist reform means that the politics of the plan is what you're endorsing, not necessarily the 1AC's text itself, which is our Younger's and Yoder's evidence. Experimentation and funding is another warrant. They conceded marijuana makes up 99% of arrests and policing now, so eliminating it takes away the monetary push for the rest of the war on drugs, because those aren't drugs that are used as much to regulate, and experimentation that's wild and fielding. The precedent argument, the specificity argument was answered above. The rollback claim does not make any sense. Startable Fiat does solve, otherwise the affirmative can never win, because the negative just reads a card that there's a 2016 GOP precedent, means that there's no AF, which is the argument Miles made about politics turning the case. This applies equally here, and means that they do not get a rollback claim. It also makes zero sense because they have no card about marijuana, which is applied above, and while our 2AC Shansky card is about a marijuana ruling, it says that there will not be rollback, which answers us directly. Even if we don't win this, they've conceded the massive policing and imprisonment is occurring domestically due to the marijuana prohibition itself. That's a DH, the alternative, because investigating libidinal investments gets us nowhere. It tells drug users just to sober up instead of recognizing they are human like everyone else and deserve basic protections. Their argument is offensive. That's Lavin, which will be justified below. The Schlag argument does not make any sense. Affective appeals are sometimes necessary to mobilize change, which is our Conley argument. We are not all media. We are not always legal. We believe that using these spaces for experimentation are necessary, which is why Zanati says this form of governmentality is necessary to tinker with the tools we were dealt. There's no mediocrity, DA. We're not obsessed with this. We don't do this in every, this is not like we do this in every facet of life. Our argument is that we've been posed a resolutional question. We are answering that question. Zanati says this testing is good, and we are not obsessed with simulation. This evidence is, their evidence about simulation is by a visual designer, not talking about debate. We usually for our evidence, which is actually in the context of discussing IHRL policy and system starting with the state is necessary. There's no internal link to violence, so this doesn't make much sense anyway. They also conceded the Myers card, which says that their politics devolves into ethical self-therapeutic ethical self-reflection. Means you have to tether it to institutional determinants to start from the forefront, which is key. The other case. Things exist, our evidence cites empirics of displacement in Latin America, war on drugs numbers, etc., which is all of what Miles said in the 1AR, and they have zero evidence disputing this, so you should not just grant their broader thing. The app has not already happened. The process of refinement through each debate is iterative, allows us to sculpt better advocacies, which is our argument. You should not vote on presumption. They haven't met the burden of rejoinder, which was impacted further before the critique. Framework 2 arguments debates a game. One debates a game. It doesn't impact our political subjectivities. We're here to win. They concede that argument, which proves that their competitive equity matters. They concede the critique does not leave the academy or do anything for material conditions. The second, even if they win their framework, the app gets away the Fiat impacts of the plan. The one and C's introduction does not make any sense to rebut that arguments are not confusion about the role of debate. We have impact turns to them saying that your form of debate is bad, but those impact turns are all secondary to the question of whether or not we win fairness. Fairness is a prerequisite to their impact. If the app doesn't have a chance to adequately respond to the negative position, or the neg gets to co-op most of the app offense by saying the plan is irrelevant, then the negative claims haven't been adequately tested and should be presumptively false. But if they win, debate does more than shape our subjectivities, and that impact matters. We have impact turn their arguments. One, assessing a range of political outcomes and deciding between them inculcates a useful decision-making heuristic that can be applied in other facets of life. Our commonly evidence is fantastic and says that these forms of rural experimentation are valuable insofar as they can expand our political horizons and expose us to possibilities previously unthought. Choosing which course of action is more preferable is a useful skill because because we'll have to make choices in every day of our lives. How could the 2 NR possibly say the 1 AR dropped this framing about Zonati when the entire 1 AR was premised around the idea of reaching contingent conclusions are necessary and good? Second, no link to Lundberg. Our argument is that the outcome of any given debate reflects a contingent assessment of who did the better debating in the debate, and the metric along which you determine that is desirability of plan. We have been presented with the question of whether the resolution in this debate in the affirmative is a response to that question. Nothing more, nothing less. We obviously don't expect a direct response from institutions in a one-to-one manner, which is why we are not the WTO protesters. Debate is an intellectual testing ground. Why are they here if all political claims are not just a bad repressed desire for recognition from the big other? Why do they preach the horrors of neoliberalism in every other debate? The negative cannot answer these questions with anything other than bad faith. If they are just here for fun, then fine, so are we, and we think reading plans are fun. If they are just here to reveal to us their fantasies, then vote after ruptures Bostu's fantasies, because they are community saviors and psychoanalysts. The endless nature of the cycle of fantasy accusation just proves that you should default to an intersubjective framework for that. The communities of psychoanalysis framing. Endless nature of fantasy accusation proves to you that you should default to intersubjective frameworks, because this is an endless process that never results in anything. That's why our Schwartz and Frederick cards are really important. Third, our answers to theory language intersubjectivity grounded in a contestation of the resolution. The 2 NR concedes the Myers card, which is explained above. 4 is the naughty impact turns this totalizing account of desire and lack positive psychoanalytic explanations. The permutation. The next argument that the alternative does not solve the F. There's no alternative that can access the war on drugs. The obsession argument does not make any sense, and we do not stick to the current letter of the law, which is why none of these link arguments make sense. The whole 1 AR is premised on the idea that we are totally a radical move. Their deliberative democracy, the argument about why it's not falsifiable applies equally to them, but our argument is that we are not necessarily a one-to-one deliberative democracy, but rather an advocacy testing using those skills outside debate and inside debate is necessary.
They have reviewed
for dramatic intent.
Okay. 2-1 half.
Hi, Seth. I think that there needs to be better explanation. I think here's something in the 2AR. I think just a better explanation of why I got in the framework debate of why some of your offense matters. And this, I think you're correct. That you assert that fairness is the most important thing. And I think that you could make a lot of the negative offense just go away by just spending a little more time explaining why that matters more than the 2NR says that why does fairness matter if it doesn't achieve things. So I think that. I think there needs to be more persuasive, response to that argument. So that we should be focusing more on what is more what creates a more productive politics, I guess. And I think it just seems like that seemed kind of weak in the 1AR and the 2AR. So I think that the debate kind of comes to who does that. And I have a really tough time comparing from the AF, the Connolly and the Myers evidence, and the Lundberg evidence from the negative, because it seems like neither one is really. I think both teams are kind of extending the evidence and say they didn't answer the warrant in this evidence, you didn't answer the warrant in this evidence, and it's even the Myers evidence kind of he talks about it doesn't really resolve the chicken egg problem. It's how do politics start in the first place? Are demands really successful? And I think that while I think y'all are doing a good job explaining why politics is possible, why some of these things could potentially work, I don't know that. The form of the 1AC, the demand form, is a good way of creating this. I think that not just the Lundberg evidence, also this Schlag mediocrity argument. It seems like the what we gain from this, from the debate form, doesn't train us to be good, to be good at politics. So the kind of politics that's created is not one that is productive. So I think that the training we get from debate is one that is not. So it seems like a lot of these theoretical things that the Connolly evidence, the Myers evidence, other pieces of evidence, talk about, are that's not necessarily denied by the fact that the way we go about the training for that is not this is perhaps not the best way to do that. So I think there just needs to be a better resolution to that debate, because I'll be honest, just reading the evidence over and over, I don't really know that there's a great resolution to that. And I think that it seemed to me a lot of parts of both last rebuttals were spent on questions that I didn't think were entirely relevant. I think that I like this plan, it's rolled back argument. It seems like the AF is on. First of all, obviously the plan itself gets rolled back. Your argument's that there's going to be another decision that will undermine the AF's ability to solve. But maybe for some spillover. But I don't think the AF itself can be overturned. I think that the result of the plan would still be legalization of marijuana, which is good. It's causing violence right now. So it seems like there's going to be an impact to the AF. I think just maybe more time spent on this argument, what creates a better form of politics would have been a better time investment. And likewise, I think they're going to win some kind of impact to the criticism. And I think that they are going I think this the meat is is this the best way to go about this politics? And like I said, question of why about the implementation of the resolution, and this why that that may have tipped my ballot. Just that it's the ballot where we're talking about has where there's competitive equity. It's kind of annoying. A great job responding to the that would create necessarily just fairness. So that's really it. Way to productive way. This alternative might have a better chance of creating a politics. Like that, constant demanding has a better chance of.
If I just think that debate, then why do we need an impact of fairness? It seems to presume that it matters, which we're agreeing that it doesn't. why does it matter if they create better politics? Like, doesn't that prove that they have a truly political, which links to?
I mean, I know that that's necessarily true. Okay, so debate doesn't do anything in that. I guess I misunderstood that argument just to be like debate doesn't do anything, as in like what just like us doesn't leave the room. I thought that was kind of the argument that reading the Myers argument you're still going for is that the training we get here is still relevant. Maybe I'm understanding reading and like where you're getting your offense from, but I think still explaining why it's good for like it's important for it to be fair in order to test arguments, not just like just like more of it like why fairness is a prerequisite to testing the truth of their claims. I don't know. I guess I was just maybe confused about where you're getting your internal link from. It seems I don't see why that undermines that argument.
Okay, makes sense.
Sure. So, ultimately, I don't really know what impact the negative is going for in the 2NR. So the kind of way I'm looking at this is that the question in my mind is the F might not solve, but it also might, and that there's a quantifiable reason for why that's a thing that I should be considered about. I don't really know what the alternative does to address the affirmative better. Like, that's the part of the 2NR and even the 2NC that is failing to be, for me to like comprehend what it is that libidinal investment can do to resolve the affirmative in a better way. And I'll talk about that more in a minute on the K. I think the F has a tangible impact that I know is true and will happen, and that there's a chance that voting for them is a way to respond to it. One thing that I don't really see a negative response to is the affirmative argument that like they get to fiat that the affirmative happens. So even if you win, many of the like content of the way you have debated does not result in something productive outside of this room, and therefore may not solve your harm. Like, if I start from the presumption that the debate is a game, which both sides have agreed to, it does not leave the room, and they get to fiat that the AF is a thing that happens.
Do you think we didn't answer that they get to fiat their plan?
I don't.
Debate is only a game.
Say, okay, you're.
There's two questions, sorry.
Yeah, what do you.
You can start with this.
So I guess my first question is, you thought we did not address the argument that they get to fiat their plan.
I do not see anything in the 2NR that I think is like a comprehensive answer to that.
At the bottom of the case, when I said the simulation DA that they dropped and didn't
So,
respond to again in the 2
I'm going to get to that in just a minute, so we'll keep
Okay.
going. Hold on, let me see where I was. Anyhow, but yeah, so I think if there's any kind of chance that the AF wins solvency, then I think that I should probably vote for them, because even if the affirmative might be a poor form, there's not really a better alternative explanation, and there's certainly no like external impact that is at all convincing me that the negative would be preferable. I don't see any reason why precedent has to spill over. They keep saying their HR law supersedes a single convention. That seemed obvious to me. It doesn't really also seem like a question of rollback in my mind, because I don't see any piece of evidence that you have that says the courts would reinterpret it. Supreme Court is typically rule precedent, and I don't understand how that is really applied to the affirmative or would cause it to be reinterpreted in any way. I also feel like that is a thing that likely resolve. Also, the rollback EV to me just says that if judges are ideologically opposed, it increases the chances that something will be rolled back later. But I don't, what would that rollback look like in this world where they've just said that this is a thing that applies to this precedent? You have no, do what?
They would just rule in the opposite direction.
Well, but what is that based on? You have no piece of evidence that says that they would ideologically.
They dropped it in the 2AC.
I mean, you said it, but
Well,
claim
and
warrant data.
And then we read a bunch more cards.
I don't think you have a card that
It's
makes
possible that our
anything
card
close
doesn't
to
say
that
the
argument.
exact
It
argument.
not exact. I don't think it even comes close.
Really, that
It's a social scientific study of the Supreme Court ideology or precedent, which I do not think in any way has been contextualized to respect the particular claim the affirmative is making.
sorry,
also,
but was if they win.
yeah, but
the
so
next time this comes up, they're just gonna be like,
it comes up. What's this? You don't.
I mean,
The
yeah.
card's not in my mind. It says that there increases the chances that it would. That there's a so play an.
Let me just not only are they did not make any of those arguments about They were just like
Fine, because the
but
AF.
they right?
Hold on, this is why I'm going to explain why. The has argued by the immediate action of the plan would dismantle the war. So, for example, arrests, and it's a huge portion of the drug war, the wild. There's a pretty good chance immediate action of the AF would solve enough in the short term. Okay. I don't know what it means that is like Shin has political movement. Evidence concedes that it's a large thing, but it's a slow accumulation that their mind kind of made some sense to me. It's saying that there's a little problem with this argument. If the institutional change, then the individual desire for the change must have been there in the first place. So I just don't think that there's enough here to get to anything that I think is A, presumption level, or B, where the alternative has ever been explained to have a chance of solving better than the affirmative. What I'm voting on is that there is no external. I think that there is the alternative. I don't think I could be, even if I could, I don't see how that would be quantifiable or why it would be necessary or preferable to the affirmative in any way. So it's almost kind of like a presumption decision where I know that the AF will solve. I do not know that the alternative is better in any way, and if it does solve better, I don't know how that proves that the affirmative was a bad idea.
When you say quantifiable, what do you mean?
How I guess I don't know. I don't want to use the word in the definition. I would not be able to, that's just a synonym, but calculate how much better the alternative was, or point to a thing that I thought was a concrete net benefit to the alternative.
What would you say the percentages, that the percentage chance that the ballot results in the overturning of
I
the drug
honestly
law?
have no idea.
Right, that's my point.
But
You said that they have a quantifiable solvency advantage.
I haven't said I could. That's the problem. Is I haven't said that I can quantify a percentage chance of the affirmative. I'm just saying that I know that there is a decent chance that the affirmative results in solvency.
What's the decent chance?
Well, what do you like? I don't. I cannot physically put a percentage on it.
Is that the affirmative plays into a certain kind of rhetorical form, where they claim that they want something, they ask for the recognition of that claim through the ballot. We have made an argument about the way that that rhetorical structure is iterative and repetitive, that it's a kind of repetition compulsion, because the claim is made again and again, the people grant it again and again, but the claim and the recognition become an excuse from not actually doing anything to create the possibilities for the claim. We further said that that claim has no validity. There's no reason that you would expect that your ballot creates the F. That's why the simulation bad argument is important, because it's a reason why Fiat is a bad mode of politics.
So I think that the AF has answered this kind of obsession argument, and they're saying that they're not, this is not that a thing that they are obsessed with. And the only kind of impact that I found to this in your pieces of...
That's the K, though. The K
only
is
thing
that they don't actually care about the thing. They just keep
okay,
saying
so
they want it again and again. Saying no is key to forcing them to admit that they don't want the
But
thing.
then
or
what
that they have
does
to do
saying
something
no
else.
and forcing them to admit do to it? The only thing that I can find in your piece of schlag evidence is saying that it could lead to
Well, the Lundberg
mediocre
evidence-
action and
Well, I'm sorry,
implementation.
the Lundberg evidence is quite good. It says this makes us actually political subjects, able to achieve the things that we want. I mean,
And not
But
just good,
but
not
the
answered,
the Lundberg evidence is quite good to me. Was not. That's the thing. I did not, at the end of the 2NR, understand what the alternative did to make us better political subjects that could do things.
But that was the point. The refusal is what makes us better, and the card says the refusal makes us better, and they kind of draw that the refusal makes us better.
The refusal
I understand
the
that it's-
possibility of the AF happening, which is why the solvency question,
understand.
as you were explaining it, doesn't make any sense, because our whole point is that we make the AF more likely than the AF does.
I understand that. I'm saying I don't. What I do not understand is the warrant for how you make the app more likely than the affirmative does.
It's
So
our
you just-
argument
but you
about
just don't-
demand and desire that, they didn't answer our psychoanalysis type
Okay, so so let's go. I'm going to the K now. The kind of top of this is that I do not understand many of the arguments that were made here. Most of it, not most of it, a good chunk of it just does not pass the make sense test for me. I've never read book 1 about psychoanalysis. I will admit to knowing basically nothing about it, and a lot of what you said just did not process for me in this debate. So I do not think that I could give a negative ballot on explaining why psychoanalysis controls, kind of everything and the framing and social relations. I do not think that I could coherently explain that to myself, let alone out loud. So that makes me very nervous about...
That seems reasonable, but I believe that the way you describe the affirmative is you cannot explain why they would solve, but you're kind of sure that they do.
No, that's not what I said. I said that I cannot fully quantify the percentage to which the affirmative
We were
could
like,
solve.
can you explain the mechanism by which they solve? And you were like, maybe.
That, yeah, they've got some evidence that says that over
We've
time...
got some evidence that says what?
And
The
what
difference is that
and what
we
I'm
have
saying,
evidence that
so,
describes the rhetorical situation in this
and
space.
the difference is
and they
that
don't.
I was more persuaded by their evidence because I understood more of the arguments and the claims that they were making.
Sure.
Like,
I mean, in a
I
certain
don't doubt-
sense, it almost proves the argument. But I will. Sorry.
Sure,
I
but
don't mean to be
yeah.
mean.
Yeah, but and I, sure, but
No, that's
here we are.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
So I think I had two more things to say. Let me. Yeah, I guess I kind of already said this. I don't know what libidinal engagement means in this context or what it does to resolve the affirmative. I really, let alone, have no idea how that results in any kind of material change in the drug war. And so you refuse the call of the act for the possibility of new politics. That's not getting it done for me. That's not a thing that I understand how that would resolve the affirmative. And then, the other thing, so this deliberative democracy argument and the falsifiability argument was pretty interesting to me, and I felt like this could have been a very big problem for the app, but the problem that I had is that I don't really understand the impact of it. I get that the evidence says deliberative democracy isn't a good theory for explaining things, but then how does that implicate the affirmative? Does that only apply to the framework? Does that prove that the advantage is wrong?
Right after I read that card, I said, that means the advantage is wrong because they have no theory backed by social science about how legal actors operate, and we do, which is a precedence thing, which maybe is not totally valid, but the onus is on them to develop a socially scientific and falsifiable means by which legal actors create
So-
change. I mean, literally, I said that.
Yeah,
Not enough?
not
What would it
not
be?
even in the 2 and R. And
That
what?
was-
So here's the other thing: is if you have a single piece of social scientific evidence to prove that the claims of the affirmative are not true.
The precedent thing.
The precedent argument I don't think is about the app.
Sorry, but they said that falsifiability is the standard by which you hold truth. Why is it our
So,
burden to
yeah, that
prove-
means that
Why is it our
if-
burden to falsifiably
So-
prove that they're wrong instead of their burden to falsifiably prove that they're wrong?
I don't think that they have said that it quickly makes everything presumption level if you do not have falsifiable piece of evidence. I think that this is setting up
Well, we
an
did,
evidence
though.
framing. What you did, but what you asserted that, but what again? Claim, warrant, data. I don't know. There are a lot of things I feel like you're saying. Well, I said this. I asserted this. Yeah, you said those words, but there's not a full argument there in my mind.
I thought this was good debate. One of the things I will say in this one, I don't like the time limits, is the reading of the evidence goes back and forth. Two things that I think happened in the debate that are relatively significant. First thing is just to I wish you had probably not spent as much time on the case and spent more time on the K, because I think in that world you probably win the debate, at least in my mind, because some of the explanations get fleshed out a little bit. I didn't really see what the precedent stuff was getting. I didn't think it was really all that important. It takes out access to their larger potential advantage, but if you win the framework debate, none of that shit matters anyway. So I was like, just spend your time on the K. Because, I'm looking at just the ink, and I got almost as much time on the case as I do on the K, and I didn't think that was productive for you at the end of the debate. The second thing that happens, and this falls in line with some of the things that are my judge philosophy, which didn't help you. Probably the first one is that I do believe in durable fiat, which is a strange thing because I was like, well, if you win this rollback argument, it makes sense. But then I was like, I explicitly say I don't believe in that, and that I think it's a bad process for debate, which is another part of the reason why I was like, why are we spending so much time on this? But I also think that's relevant because I don't know how this got worded, vote AF to vote neg. In some ways, I feel like if you're right about your argument and I vote AF, it ruptures your fantasy, which makes you a better political actor, which problematized my ability to sort of resolve the alt. Because it seems like at the end of the day, no matter which way I vote, maybe somebody will get off their ass and do something about marijuana being illegal outside of this space. And I think that argument does hurt you because it sort of demonstrates, the alt not being all that productive in a sense. Because it's going to work either way. The question at the end for me was just, is this a political statement I'm willing to get behind and endorse to say maybe this shit shouldn't be illegal? And yeah, it's a normative statement, so maybe the Schlag stuff matters a little bit more. But I don't think you got a great answer to that because the whole debate is about process. Who offers the most productive form of politics. And this is why this is so hard to decide, because both people are going to look at the Lundberg evidence and go, yeah, that's really good evidence. Most people will also look at the Connolly evidence and go, yeah, that's really fucking good evidence. So how do I sort these two things out? I don't think either side is doing a great job saying, here's the benchmark. That's sort of the defining line between the two. At the end of the day, I just sort of think they have a little bit more defense against some of your claims than you do. And I'm not sure that you want to make falsifiability the standard with a psychoanalytic alternative. I don't think that's a great spot for you to be in. Let me backtrack a little bit in terms of what happens at the top of the debate and the framework debate for me. First off, I do think that this fairness stuff is important just in the sense that they have to have some way to access offense, which is why, by the way, I almost checked in on your Gorgias thing, because I think your answers are so bad, but you needed to spend more time on it for me, just a little bit more. I don't know why you're not reading any, this is just fucking nihilism, which is bad, or sophistry is bad. I don't know what your answer to it was, but I don't know why you went for the inherency part of that.
Well, we went for both parts.
Sort of.
But this is crazy, but how many more sentences on nothing exists are necessary for you to vote on nothing?
It isn't. I think it's the point of why that matters. So sort of explain what Gorgias does about why this is a big deal at the end to the schoolmasters about why they couldn't answer this argument is a relevant consideration.
Yeah.
That would have been utility. It's not the link part at all. It's why this matters. And it's almost like the impact and how you get to presumption out of this argument, which is, I think, just something you assumed and never articulated. And that's the part that's missing. But, nihilism, pretty good reason to vote negative. It's a good philosophy. The alternative to this, which may be a piece of evidence that you can say, and I know this is in some classical rhetorical theory books, is another way to read the outcome of that is logos is the only thing that matters, which I think could be a productive place for you at the end of the debate, because then it's just reading of the evidence, and you just have to win that part. Matters. All right, on the K part, stick them more to the cross-examination, please. Because if you do that, your link arguments make a lot more sense. I understand you don't want to answer this question necessarily at the top of the 1AC, but I think an answer that is better in line with your 2AC arguments. Because your 2AC arguments about experimentation is important. It's something we should talk about. We can bounce ideas off, potentially productive. Who knows what we do afterwards? Maybe it doesn't, but there's probably something worthwhile about that process because that's your argument. And I think you get away from that. Let them off the hook, at least in my mind, a little bit by not tying them to the cross-examination. Instead of saying new AF, say it's what they said in the cross-ex is why they should lose. They don't get to reframe the debate in the 2AC in terms of now we're social experimentation so we can cause change outside. They are tied to, we don't know, doesn't really matter. It demonstrates that their demand really isn't all that important, that there's some impetus to it. And I think that's more where your link argument is.
I just thought we did say that.
You did sort of say it. I'm not saying you didn't.
And it's like it was
I think
so
you could say
clear
it
on a
better.
performative level because they would move back and forth between these vacuous claims.
Like
It's
even
like,
the
oh
top
yeah,
of the
this is just a
2
game and the game has no
framework.
significance. But somehow the significance of the game is that it teaches us lots of skills that we can then use in outside of space. And in fact, it's not even about the skills, it's about the thing that we're talking about right now, which is important, even though it's just a game that has no significance, which is crazy, and that's the whole point of the Schlag argument, which is that we are stuck in this argument room where we assume that what we're doing inside the room causes something outside the room. We never think about the outside of the room. And I felt like our alternative was a very clear explanation of why it is that that rhetorical circle continues to function, it's because of this identification of a certain relationship with trope and demand. I didn't think that they
But I don't-
responded to that argument.
Well, yes, they did, because they changed their interpretation.
But they're
It's
already,
the-
but
the
that-
vast-
I
changes.
understand the
That changes, like-
vacillation is bad,
Yeah.
but at the end of the debate, they have a position that's a little bit more definitive.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But a position
I'm
that
just
is not a
saying.
position that's totally ungrounded and grounded simultaneously. Because that's crazy. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all over the place. Makes it bad to be negative. It's good to give the last speech sometimes in these debates.
All right.
You know where I'm at with that. My point is, I do think they have some defense against psychoanalytic theory, generally speaking.
What's
and maybe
the defense?
let me look at the pieces of evidence that I thought were relevant that he extended at the bottom. It's a totalizing theory, so it's sort of hard to understand how it functions as a theory. And the reason that mattered to me is because you're like, they have to have an alternative theory. I'm like, but I don't really understand your theory in its entirety if there are some indicts in terms of how it functions. Like, their argument literally says it erases truth, that it makes us unable to practice politics because everything turns inward. It's all about the self and about figuring out your own desire. And that tied to their argument about why we need to relate things to institutions, at least in the conversation, seems to be important. And I think that's where their Myers evidence becomes significant, at least for why their political project is potentially successful. And, you know, it's not that I think your Lundberg evidence obviously is great. I give a shit about it all the time, because I swear to God he wrote it for debate purposes. But, you know, nobody ever calls him on that one. The problem that I have in this debate is, like, at the end of the day, that link turn argument about rupturing your fantasy, this sort of vote AF to vote neg, I think is not a bad place to be. And I understand, I guess it's kind of new, maybe. I thought about that for a long
Not
time.
only is it new, it doesn't make sense. Because the whole point of our argument is that they have offered a political program. Our point is they don't want the political program, so you should rupture that.
Yeah,
To
but
say-
you're offering a political
to say
program as an
rupture
alternative.
our
That's
fantasy,
even your whole point.
it's
at
like
the time.
rupture our fantasy
Do you
that
want
they
it?
have a fantasy,
Do
and
you
that will
want it?
cause
That's
us
the
to
question.
believe in their. But
Well,
that doesn't
well,
really
the other
fantasy, you don't
question.
have a
Sorry,
fantasy.
the other reason why it was sort of weird and why I kind of explained this in context. I get maybe it was sort of not prejudiced.
It's
not
just late in the debate.
Yeah, right. It's not so much the relationship between having a political program at all, but the specific relationship between the subject and the institution that we find problematic. And that's our whole point about
Yeah.
you never expect the institution to respond, which doesn't really apply to us in this case because there's no like we're just saying no to them.
It would be
and
like
we
if
think
you
that's
were-
good for opening up our
If you were
desire.
in the asylum and you were like, hey, you have this fantasy that needs to be engaged with, and the person was like, no, you have a fantasy that I have a fantasy, so I don't need to be cured.
Exactly.
Like, no one
That's
would
sort of the
believe that.
path I feel like I'm led down with psychoanalytic theory.
Right, but so how do you resolve this
That-
institutional thing where we were like it's the relationship between the subject and the institution that's important? And the Lundberg evidence does say that. It's like
Absolutely.
that's what demand is.
Mhm.
And then so when they're like you're really a demand, well we're not given that definition.
Well, you're a demand for a different relationship with an institution.
No.
Why not?
Because our argument was never like the institution should do something for us.
Right, but your discussion about reject their institutional claim is an argument about how we politically interact with institutions. I don't understand how you divorce the two. Like, I think it leads you down the rabbit hole, and that is part of the problem I have with this theory, where I think they do have some defense that says it's sort of hard to think of any form of politics under psychoanalytic theory. And now, the one other thing I want to branch back to, too, this is also why I don't think you can say it's about social science. Because I don't understand how you validate any of these things. How do you validate lack?
We have a great Lundberg card. Psychoanalysis is science, they dropped it.
It's a science
Says
of
it's
trope.
falsifiable.
It's based on the
It's a
notion
trope,
that we
it's
can
not a
link repeated rhetorical artifacts.
If it
with
was a
certain modes
trope,
of
trust me,
behavior.
rhetoric would be doing much better.
That
at
may
least
be
in
fair.
relation to other social sciences. They
But I
nobody use
don't
tropes.
think
as
there's
a-
There's no
super
half
answer.
answer to that. That's
Yeah.
I mean
I
I
think
get
they're
that
kind
I
of
get that the
evidence
Ron
of my
Stevenson
evidence.
response to that is very good.
Well, that's
but
what I'm
like,
saying.
oh.
I'm just, it doesn't resonate with me. I think that's part of your problem.
Oh god, this is heartbreaking. Well, I thank everyone for listening. We hope this will happen again in some form. And the repetition compulsion will be shattered.
Damn.
Thanks y'all.
Good debate.
Yeah, good video.
One thing I just wanted to add.